People spend years trying to become stronger. They chase better jobs, better relationships, more confidence, more influence. They read books about leadership, watch successful people, study communication, learn productivity. And yet, many still feel as though something invisible keeps pulling them backward. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack opportunity, but because there is one person they have never truly learned to lead: themselves. This is one of the strangest truths about human life. The greatest obstacle you will ever face rarely looks like an obstacle. It wears your own face. It speaks with your own voice. It justifies your excuses. It comforts your fears. It delays your decisions. And because it feels familiar, you mistake it for yourself. Years pass before most people realize they have not been directing their lives. They have simply been reacting to them. Think about it for a moment. How many decisions have you made simply because you felt tired? Because you were afraid? Because someone disappointed you? Because you wanted approval? Because you wanted to avoid discomfort? None of those moments looked important. Yet together, they quietly shaped the person you became. Life is rarely transformed by one dramatic decision. It is shaped by thousands of ordinary moments when no one else is watching. Most people believe leadership begins the day someone trusts them, the day they become a manager, a business owner, a parent, a teacher, a coach, a CEO. But real leadership begins much earlier than that, long before another person follows your voice. Someone has already been following your habits, your future. Every decision you make today teaches tomorrow's version of you what kind of person you are becoming. That is leadership, whether you realize it or not. Here is something almost nobody teaches. Every morning, before you influence another human being, you negotiate with yourself. Will you keep your promises or break them? Will you stay focused or become distracted? Will you remain calm or allow emotion to choose for you? Will you pursue what matters or what feels comfortable? These quiet negotiations determine far more about your life than any speech you will ever give. Many people spend decades trying to control circumstances. Very few learn to control attention. Yet attention is where every life is built. Whatever repeatedly captures your attention eventually shapes your identity. Your mind becomes what it practices. If it practices distraction, you become distracted. If it practices fear, fear becomes familiar. If it practices discipline, discipline slowly becomes natural. This is why mastering yourself is not about becoming someone different. It is about deciding what your mind rehearses every single day. Perhaps no one ever explained this to you. School taught you mathematics, languages, history, science. Work taught you professional skills. Life taught you responsibility. But who taught you how to govern your own thoughts? Who explained why your emotions sometimes become louder than your values? Who showed you how small compromises quietly become permanent habits? Who taught you that confidence is not something you discover, but something you repeatedly earn from yourself? For many people, the answer is no one. This is why so many intelligent people remain trapped. They know what to do. They simply cannot get themselves to do it consistently. They confuse knowledge with transformation. But information alone never changes a life. Identity does. Every lasting change begins when the person making the decision becomes different. Not overnight, not dramatically, quietly, patiently, one choice at a time. There's another misunderstanding that keeps people stuck. They believe self-mastery means becoming perfect. It does not. Perfection creates pressure. Self-mastery creates awareness. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. The goal is to stop letting emotion become your leader. The goal is not to remove fear. It is to prevent fear from making your decisions. The goal is not to control everything around you. It is to become responsible for what happens within you. That responsibility changes everything. Imagine two people facing the same challenge, the same criticism, the same disappointment, the same uncertainty. One immediately reacts. The other pauses. They breathe. They think. Then they choose their response. Outwardly, the difference seems almost invisible. Internally, it changes the direction of an entire life. One moment of awareness prevents years of regret. One deliberate decision becomes a foundation for another. and another, until eventually character is formed. The remarkable thing about self-mastery is that no one can give it to you. Not a mentor, not a book, not success, not money, not praise. It cannot be borrowed, purchased, or inherited. It is built through thousands of quiet victories that nobody applauds. Choosing patience over impulse, discipline over comfort, purpose over distraction, truth over convenience. Each victory seems small, but together they create someone entirely different. And here's a reward that few people expect. As you begin to master yourself, you stop needing to prove yourself. You become calmer, clearer, less reactive, more intentional. People begin trusting you before you speak, not because you have learned new techniques, but because stability has become part of your presence. Leadership starts to emerge naturally, not because you chased influence, because you became trustworthy, first to yourself, then to everyone else. Over the next chapters, we are going to explore the quiet principles that shape extraordinary leaders from the inside out. You will discover why self-control creates freedom, why emotional steadiness is stronger than emotional intensity, why discipline quietly outperforms motivation, why your standards determine your future more than your goals, why clarity always comes before confidence, why the space between stimulus and response is where real leadership is born, and why the most respected people in the world are rarely those who control others, but those who have first learned to govern themselves. None of these ideas require extraordinary talent, only honest attention, and the willingness to become one decision at a time, the kind of person you would willingly follow. Because before you lead a family, before you lead a business, before you lead a team, before you lead a movement, there is one person whose trust you must earn every single day, the person you see in the mirror. Everything begins there. So take a slow breath, set aside what you think leadership means, and prepare to discover why the greatest leaders are not those who command the most people, but those who first learn to command themselves. Let's begin with the first and most important lesson. Chapter 1, The Invisible Leader Within. Part 1. People often imagine leadership as something that begins in public, a stage, a meeting, a promotion, a business, a family looking to you for direction, a room waiting for your words. But by the time any of those moments arrive, leadership has already been happening for years. Not where anyone could see it, not where applause exists, not where titles matter. It has been happening quietly, inside your own mind. There is an invisible leader living within every person. You cannot see this leader in a mirror. You cannot introduce this leader at a networking event. No resume can describe it. Yet every decision you make passes through it. Every habit answers to it. Every emotion negotiates with it. Whether you realize it or not, something inside you is always deciding what happens next. The question is not whether you are being led. The question is, who is leading you? Imagine two ships leaving the same harbor. Both are equally beautiful. Both carry enough fuel. Both have experienced crews. Both are heading toward the same destination. But beneath the deck, one captain quietly falls asleep. No storm arrives immediately. The sea remains calm. The passengers laugh. Everything appears normal. Then, little by little, the current begins making decisions the captain no longer makes. The ship drifts only a few degrees. Not enough for anyone to notice. Not enough to create panic. But after several weeks, it arrives in an entirely different ocean. Life often changes exactly like that. Rarely through catastrophe. Usually through unnoticed drift. Most people believe they are making conscious decisions all day long. I decided to check my phone. I decided to skip today's workout. I decided to stay quiet. I decided to lose my temper. But if you slow down enough, you begin noticing something surprising. Many of these decisions were already made long before you became aware of them. Not because someone else controlled you. Because yesterday I quietly instructed today. The habits you repeated, the emotions you rehearsed, the excuses you accepted, all became silent instructions for the person you are now. Think about the last time you promised yourself something. Maybe you planned to wake up earlier. Maybe you wanted to stop procrastinating. Maybe you told yourself you would exercise, study, save money, speak more confidently, or finally begin that project that has lived in your imagination for months. The promise felt real. The intention was honest. Yet, somehow, tomorrow arrived, and nothing changed. It is tempting to call this laziness. But laziness is rarely the real story. Something deeper happened. An invisible leader quietly overruled your conscious decision. Without saying a word, it whispered, "Not today." And somehow, that whisper carried more authority than your promise. That invisible leader is built little by little, not through dramatic life events, but through repetition. Every time you ignore something important, it takes notes. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, it takes notes. Every uncomfortable conversation you avoid, every difficult decision you postpone, every excuse you defend, every commitment you honor, they all become votes. Not for what you achieve, but for who silently leads your life. Imagine walking through a forest every morning. The first day, there is no path. Tall grass reaches your knees. Branches push against your shoulders. Each step requires attention. But after months of walking exactly the same route, something remarkable happens. The forest changes, not because the trees moved, because your repeated footsteps created a trail. Now, you no longer think about where to walk. Your feet simply follow what has become familiar. The human mind works much the same way. Repeated thoughts become mental pathways. Repeated emotions become emotional pathways. Repeated reactions become your default route. One day you wake up believing, "This is just who I am," when in reality, you have simply been walking the same path for a very long time. That realization changes everything, because if a path can be created, it can also be abandoned. And if it can be abandoned, a better one can be built. But first, you have to notice that you are walking one at all. Most people never do. They mistake familiarity for identity. Have you ever met someone who always expects disappointment? Before good news arrives, they prepare for bad news. Before an opportunity appears, they explain why it probably won't work. Before trusting another person, they already anticipate betrayal. From the outside, it seems pessimistic, but inside their own experience, it feels realistic. Why? Because the invisible leader inside them has practiced that story thousands of times. Eventually, expectation becomes perception. They stop seeing life clearly. They begin seeing life through the habits of their own mind. The opposite is equally true. You have probably met people who remain surprisingly calm when everything around them becomes chaotic. Not because life is easier for them, not because they possess extraordinary confidence, but because somewhere years earlier, they quietly trained another leader within themselves. One that does not panic every time uncertainty arrives. One that pauses before reacting. One that asks, what actually matters right now? That question alone can completely change the direction of a moment. Picture a snow globe. Shake it hard, and tiny white flakes rush everywhere. Nothing is visible. The small house disappears. The trees disappear. Even the ground disappears. Everything becomes movement. Many people spend their lives inside a shaken snow globe. Thought after thought, emotion after emotion, notification after notification, opinion after opinion, fear after fear. They become so accustomed to the movement that they forget clarity was always underneath. Sometimes, the greatest act of leadership is not adding another thought. It is allowing the snow to settle. This is why silence can feel strangely uncomfortable. Not because silence is empty, because silence introduces you to the leader that has been speaking all along. Many people stay constantly busy for one simple reason. Noise protects them from meeting themselves. Television, music, scrolling, conversations, work, more scrolling. Anything that prevents a quiet encounter with their own mind. Because once the noise disappears, another voice becomes impossible to ignore. It does not shout. It does not criticize dramatically. It asks quieter questions. Why did you react like that? Why do you keep delaying what matters? Why does someone else's opinion still control your mood? Why do you seek permission for a life that already belongs to you? These questions are uncomfortable. Not because they are cruel, because they are honest. There's a strange paradox hidden inside every human being. You can become incredibly successful while remaining completely unknown to yourself. You can build a respected career and still be ruled by fear. You can appear confident while secretly depending on constant approval. You can lead meetings, raise children, manage companies, teach classrooms, yet still surrender your own peace every time life becomes difficult. External leadership can be learned surprisingly quickly. Internal leadership takes much longer because nobody else can practice it for you. Consider a puppet suspended by invisible strings. From a distance, it appears alive. Its arms move, its head turns, its legs walk forward. But none of the movement belongs to the puppet. Every motion originates somewhere else. Now replace the strings with anger, fear, approval, comfort, comparison, habit. Without noticing, many people spend years responding to invisible strings. Someone criticizes them, their entire day changes. Someone ignores them, their confidence disappears. One unexpected setback, and they question their entire future. It feels like freedom, yet every emotional string quietly determines the next movement. Real freedom begins in an unexpected place, not when life becomes easier, not when everyone understands you, not when circumstances finally cooperate. Freedom begins the moment you notice the strings, because once you can see them, you no longer have to obey them. And that realization leads us to a question that sounds simple, yet has the power to transform an entire life. If there is an invisible leader shaping every decision, who trained that leader? And more importantly, can it be retrained? The answer begins with something most people misunderstand. Not the world around you, but the world within you. And before you can reshape that inner world, you must first confront the one force that quietly steals more lives, dreams, and potential than failure ever could: your own unchecked impulses. There's a quiet illusion that shapes more lives than people realize. It tells you that your biggest enemy is somewhere outside of you: a difficult boss, a demanding schedule, a lack of money, bad luck, an unfair opportunity, an unsupportive family. Sometimes those obstacles are real. They deserve to be acknowledged. But there's another force that rarely receives attention, a force that quietly magnifies every external challenge. It is a part of you that seeks the easiest path, even when you know a better one exists. Imagine carrying a compass that changes direction every time the weather changes. On sunny days, it points north. When rain arrives, it points east. A strong wind sends it west. Soon, every journey becomes confusing, not because the destination moved, because your guide refused to remain steady. Many people live exactly this way. Their direction changes with their mood. When they feel inspired, they make ambitious plans. When they feel discouraged, they abandon them. When someone praises them, they believe in themselves. When someone criticizes them, they question everything. Without noticing, their emotions become the compass. And emotions were never designed to navigate an entire life. Think about a gardener planting 2 young trees. The first tree receives careful attention. Every week, the gardener straightens its trunk before it begins leaning too far. The second tree is left alone. It will correct itself, the gardener thinks. Years pass. Both trees become large. One stands tall. The other bends sharply toward the ground. At that point, changing its direction requires enormous effort, not because the tree is stubborn, because small corrections ignored for years eventually become permanent shapes. Character develops in much the same way. Tiny compromises rarely feel dangerous until they become your normal way of living. Perhaps that is why the smallest promises matter the most. Not because waking up 15 minutes earlier changes your future overnight. Not because reading one chapter transforms your life. Not because choosing patience in one conversation makes you wise. Each action seems almost insignificant, but your invisible leader is always watching. Every kept promise whispers, "We are someone who follows through." Every broken promise quietly whispers something else. Neither message disappears. They accumulate. and eventually one becomes your identity. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to recognize someone else's blind spots? You see the friend staying in a relationship that slowly drains them. You notice the colleague avoiding responsibility. You recognize when someone keeps making the same mistake. From the outside, everything appears obvious. Yet, when the pattern belongs to us, it becomes strangely invisible. The mind has an extraordinary ability to explain away its own behavior. I've just been busy. I'll start next week. This isn't the right time. If circumstances improve, everything will change. Each explanation feels reasonable, until one day you realize years have quietly disappeared behind perfectly logical excuses. Imagine entering a room with slightly crooked paintings. At first, every frame catches your attention, but after living in that room for several months, you stop seeing the crookedness altogether, not because the paintings straightened themselves, because your eyes adapted. The same thing happens inside your life. The habits you once questioned become familiar. The reactions you once regretted become expected. The distractions you once resisted become routine. Comfort is not always evidence that something is healthy. Sometimes it is simply evidence that you have adapted. That is why awareness is such an unusual form of courage. It asks you to see your life as though you were meeting yourself for the first time. If you observe your daily routine without knowing your dreams, what future would you predict? If you watch your conversations, your habits, your attention, your emotional reactions, would you conclude that this person is moving toward the life they say they want, or away from it? Those questions are uncomfortable, but discomfort is often the doorway through which honesty quietly enters. There's another misunderstanding that quietly steals progress. Many people believe they need to become a completely different person, a more confident person, a more disciplined person, a more fearless person. Yet identity rarely changes through dramatic reinvention. It changes through repeated evidence. Each time you act with integrity, you gather evidence. Each time you remain calm under pressure, you gather evidence. Each time you choose what matters over what feels easy, you gather evidence. Eventually your mind stops asking, "Can I become this person?" It begins saying, "This is who we are." That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Imagine building a stone bridge across a wide river. You do not throw every stone into the water at once. You place one, then another, then another. Most days, the bridge still appears unfinished. An impatient observer might conclude that nothing meaningful is happening. Yet every carefully placed stone makes the next one possible. One morning, almost without warning, the two sides finally meet. Looking back, the bridge appears inevitable. Character grows the same way. Quietly, patiently, one decision supporting the next until the impossible begins to feel ordinary. Perhaps the greatest surprise about self-leadership is this: it does not make life easier. It makes you steadier. Storms still arrive. People still disappoint you. Plans still fail. Unexpected problems still appear without permission. But something profound begins to change. You stop asking life to become less difficult. You become more capable of meeting whatever arrives. That is a very different kind of strength. It is quiet. It rarely announces itself. Yet everyone who encounters it can feel it. Have you ever noticed that the people who carry genuine presence rarely seem in a hurry to prove themselves? They listen more carefully. They react less quickly. Their confidence does not demand attention. It creates space. Being around them feels strangely calming, not because they possess all the answers, but because they are no longer fighting themselves. The conflict inside has grown quieter, and when the inner world becomes less chaotic, the outer world begins to feel more manageable. This is the invisible leader within. It is not your personality. It is not your job title. It is not your reputation. It is a silent pattern beneath all of those things. The pattern that decides whether fear or wisdom speaks first, whether comfort or purpose wins today's decision, whether yesterday continues writing tomorrow, or whether a different future quietly begins today. Long before anyone trusts your guidance, that invisible leader is already deciding the quality of your life. Every ordinary moment is another opportunity to strengthen it or surrender it. There is no audience, no applause, no recognition. Only the quiet conversation between who you are and who you are becoming. But recognizing an invisible leader is only the beginning. Awareness alone cannot change your direction. A captain may finally wake and realize the ship has drifted, yet the current does not suddenly stop. There is another challenge waiting, a far more immediate one, the force that interrupts your best intentions before they ever become consistent action. It speaks in the language of just this once. It turns moments into habits, and habits into identity. To become the leader within, you must first learn to face that force without surrendering to it. Because before you can guide your future, you must conquer the one opponent that has been quietly negotiating every decision you make, your own impulses. Chapter 2. Conquer yourself before the world. There's a battle that almost everyone fights, yet very few people ever see it. It does not happen in a boardroom. It is not fought on a battlefield. It is not decided by money, intelligence, or talent. It begins in the smallest moments of your day, the moments no one else notices, the instant your alarm rings, the second someone criticizes you, the temptation to postpone what matters, the impulse to say something you'll later regret, the desire to choose comfort over purpose. These moments seem insignificant, but they are not. They are where your future quietly negotiates with your present. Most people believe they are defeated by circumstances, a lack of opportunity, bad timing, the wrong environment, difficult people. Sometimes those things matter, but more often than we care to admit, the greatest obstacle is the person making the decisions, not because that person lacks ability, but because they have never learned how to guide themselves. Imagine owning the most powerful horse in the world. Its muscles are extraordinary. Its speed is unmatched. Its endurance is remarkable. Yet every time you ride it, the horse decides where to go. It turns when it wants. It stops whenever it feels tired. It bolts toward every distraction. Who is really in control? Certainly not the rider. Potential without direction is simply wasted energy. Many lives look exactly like that magnificent horse, full of ability, yet pulled in 100 different directions by impulse. Think about the word impulse. It sounds harmless, almost innocent, yet an impulse is simply a feeling asking to become an action. The feeling says, stay in bed, buy it now, answer with anger, scroll for 5 more minutes. Tomorrow will be better. The feeling itself is never the problem. Feelings arrive without asking permission. The real question is, who receives the final vote? The feeling or the person observing the feeling? Most people never separate the two. They assume, I feel it, therefore I should follow it. That assumption quietly shapes entire lives. Imagine standing beside a river. Leaves float past on the surface. Some are green, some are brown, some spin in circles before disappearing around the bend. Now imagine jumping into the river every time a leaf appears. You would spend your entire day being carried wherever the current decided. Thoughts and emotions often behave like those leaves. They appear, they drift, they disappear. Yet, many people chase every single one. One anxious thought appears. Suddenly the entire afternoon belongs to anxiety. One angry feeling arises. Now every conversation becomes defensive. One moment of self-doubt arrives, and an opportunity disappears before it was even attempted. Not because the thought was true, because it was obeyed. There is a remarkable difference between having a thought and becoming that thought. Suppose someone walks past you and says, you'll never succeed. The words may sting, but eventually they fade. Now imagine saying those same words to yourself every morning. The voice becomes familiar, and familiar voices slowly become trusted. Without noticing, many people spend years borrowing authority from their own worst assumptions. Consider a skilled sailor crossing the ocean. The wind changes constantly. Some days it blows gently. Other days it becomes violent. The sailor does not waste energy demanding different weather. Instead, they adjust the sails. This is one of the quiet secrets of self-mastery. You cannot command every emotion. You cannot eliminate uncertainty. You cannot prevent fear from knocking on the door. but you can decide how much influence those visitors receive. The strongest people are not those who never experience fear. They are the ones who stop allowing fear to become captain. A child once tried to fly a kite on a windy afternoon. Every powerful gust pulled the kite sideways. The child became frustrated. "The wind won't let me control it." An older man smiled. "The wind isn't your enemy," he said. "You simply haven't learned how to hold the string." That lesson reaches far beyond kites. Life constantly pulls. Opinions pull. Comfort pulls. Comparison pulls. Disappointment pulls. The question is not whether life will create tension. The question is whether your hands know how to hold the string. Perhaps you have noticed something strange about your own life. Some decisions require almost no effort. You brush your teeth, lock your door, tie your shoes. You rarely debate these actions. They have become automatic. Now think about something you wish were equally natural. Reading, exercising, saving money, listening patiently, beginning difficult work without procrastination. Why do these feel so different? Because one set of actions has been practiced until it no longer requires negotiation. The other still invites debate every single day. And debates are exhausting. Imagine entering a marketplace filled with hundreds of merchants. Each one shouts louder than the last. "Choose me." "No, choose this." "You'll regret ignoring me." That marketplace exists inside your mind. One voice promises comfort. Another promises growth. One seeks approval. Another seeks integrity. One demands immediate pleasure. Another quietly reminds you of tomorrow. Leadership begins the moment you realize you do not have to buy from every merchant shouting for your attention. Have you ever watched a skilled chess player? Beginners often move the first piece that catches their eye. Experienced players pause. They see 3 moves ahead, 5 moves, sometimes 10. Self-control is remarkably similar. It creates space between desire and decision. Within that space, wisdom finally has room to breathe. Without that space, life becomes a chain of reactions, one impulse leading to another, until years later, you wonder how you arrived somewhere you never intended to go. There's another hidden truth that few people talk about. Every time you surrender to an impulse you secretly believe, "This is just who I am." But identity is not discovered in those moments. It is negotiated. Each decision quietly answers the question, who will lead next time? Suppose you choose patience instead of anger. For a brief moment, nothing dramatic happens. No audience applauds. No headlines appear. Yet something invisible changes. Your mind records evidence. We remain calm. That evidence becomes part of tomorrow's leader. Not because one decision transformed you, but because one decision made the next one slightly easier. Picture an old stone staircase climbing a mountain. No single step reaches the summit. Standing on one step changes almost nothing. Yet remove enough steps, and the mountain becomes impossible to climb. Character is built exactly this way, not through one extraordinary act of discipline, but through thousands of ordinary decisions that seem too small to matter, until one day, you discover they mattered more than anything else. The world often celebrates dramatic victories: the championship, the promotion, the successful business, the standing ovation. What it rarely sees are the quiet victories that made those moments possible. The morning someone chose discipline instead of excuses. The evenings they remained patient instead of reacting. The conversations where they listened instead of defending. The temptations they quietly declined when no one was watching. Every public victory is usually supported by hundreds of invisible ones. The world notices the fruit. Very few notice the roots. And perhaps that is the greatest misunderstanding about strength. Strength is not loud. It rarely announces itself. It appears in the ordinary moments when no one expects greatness. A deep breath before speaking. A calm response instead of a sharp reply. Beginning to work before motivation arrives. Keeping a promise after the excitement has faded. Walking away from what weakens you, even when no one would know if you stayed. Those moments shape the invisible leader more than any speech ever could. But if impulses quietly compete for control every single day, where do they come from? Why do certain habits feel almost impossible to break, while others seem effortless to build? To answer that question, we must go deeper than behavior itself. We must enter the hidden workshop where habits are quietly forged, long before they ever appear in your actions. Imagine walking through an old blacksmith's workshop. The air is warm. The rhythm of metal striking metal echoes through the room. In one corner, a piece of iron glows bright orange inside the fire. Moments later, the blacksmith removes it and begins shaping it with steady, deliberate blows. The iron does not become stronger because it avoided the fire. It becomes useful because it remained in it long enough to be transformed. Your character is shaped in much the same way. The moments you most want to escape are often the very moments quietly forming the person you are becoming. Most people believe self-control is about saying no, but that is only part of the story. Real self-control is about saying a stronger yes. A yes to the person you want to become. Imagine a traveler standing at a crossroads. One road is smooth, wide, and easy to walk. The other is narrow, uneven, and climbs steadily uphill. Without knowing the destination, almost everyone chooses the easier road, not because they are weak, because comfort is persuasive. It never argues loudly. It whispers, there will be another chance. You deserve a break. Just this once. The whisper sounds harmless, until years later, you realize it quietly chose the direction of your life. There is something fascinating about the phrase, just this once. Almost every habit that shapes a life begins with those words. One missed workout becomes another. One unnecessary purchase becomes a pattern. One avoided conversation becomes months of silence. One angry reaction becomes someone's reputation. Rarely does life change because of one decision. It changes because one decision quietly gives permission to the next. That is how momentum is born, not in spectacular moments, but in ordinary ones. Imagine placing a single drop of blue dye into a clear glass of water. At first, almost nothing changes. One drop seems insignificant, then another, then another. Eventually, the entire glass takes on a different color. No single drop transformed it. Together, they did. Your daily decisions work exactly the same way. One patient response, one promise kept, one unnecessary distraction resisted, one difficult task completed. Each decision appears too small to matter until one day someone says, "You've changed." What they are seeing is not one decision. They are seeing thousands. There's another opponent you must learn to recognize. It wears a very convincing disguise. Its name is rationalization. It allows you to remain comfortable without feeling irresponsible. It says, I'll start when life becomes less busy. I work better under pressure. This isn't the right time. Everyone else does the same thing. Notice how reasonable those sentences sound. That is precisely what makes them dangerous. The most powerful excuses are rarely obvious lies. They are comfortable stories that protect today's comfort at tomorrow's expense. Imagine living in a house with a tiny leak in the roof. Each morning, only one drop of water falls onto the wooden floor. You tell yourself, it's only one drop. Weeks pass, months pass. The floor begins to weaken, not because of one dramatic flood, because small problems ignored become large problems patiently. Character follows the same principle. The habits you ignore today are quietly constructing the circumstances you will face tomorrow. Whether you notice them or not, they continue building. Think back to someone you deeply respect. Perhaps they are calm under pressure, honest when honesty costs them something, reliable when everyone else gives excuses, patient when others become defensive. Now ask yourself something unusual. Were they born that way? Probably not. What you admire is usually the result of thousands of invisible decisions repeated until they became natural. The world often mistakes consistency for personality. It says, that's just who they are. It rarely asks, what did they practice for years? A violinist does not become graceful on stage by performing once. The elegance you see is simply repetition made invisible. Every movement has been rehearsed so often that it appears effortless. The same is true of emotional discipline. The calm person you admire is not necessarily calmer by nature. They have simply practiced returning to calm more often than panic. Their invisible leader has become experienced. Not perfect, experienced. And experience quietly changes what once felt impossible. Have you ever noticed how quickly a single spark can become a forest fire? At first, it is small enough to extinguish with your foot. Minutes later, it consumes entire hillsides. Emotions often behave in exactly this way. The first spark is usually manageable. A careless comment, a frustrating delay, a misunderstanding. But if you immediately feed that spark with imagined conversations, assumptions, and resentment, soon you are no longer responding to reality. You are responding to the fire you helped create. Self-mastery often begins by recognizing the spark before it becomes an inferno. There's a quiet freedom that arrives when you realize something profound. You do not have to believe every thought your mind produces. Just as clouds pass across the sky without changing the sky itself, thoughts pass through awareness without defining who you are. An impatient thought is not your identity. Neither is fear. Neither is envy. Neither is anger. These are visitors. Some stay briefly. Some linger longer than they should. But none deserve ownership of your home unless you continue inviting them inside. Picture yourself sitting beside a busy train station. Every few minutes, another train arrives. Some are painted in bright colors. Others are old and worn. Each one opens its doors. You are free to board any train, or none at all. Your thoughts work in much the same way. One train is labeled fear, another comparison, another resentment, another courage, another curiosity. Most people believe they must board whichever train arrives first. But leadership begins when you realize you can remain on the platform. You can let one train leave and choose another instead. That simple realization changes far more than behavior. It changes identity. Perhaps that is what true strength has always been. Not the ability to overpower other people. Not the ability to appear fearless. Not the ability to dominate every conversation. Real strength is quieter. It is the ability to remain loyal to your deepest values when your strongest impulses demand something easier. No audience will celebrate those moments. No medals will be awarded. Yet those unseen victories slowly become the foundation upon which every meaningful life is built. Long before anyone trusts your leadership, you must become someone your own conscience can trust. One day, people may admire your confidence, your discipline, your composure, your influence. They will assume those qualities appeared naturally. They will see the finished sculpture. Very few will imagine the countless invisible moments when another choice would have been easier. The conversations you chose not to have, the temptations you quietly resisted, the promises you kept after the excitement disappeared. That is a hidden cost of becoming someone worthy of leading others. It is paid privately long before it is recognized publicly. But conquering your impulses is only one part of the journey. Soon, you will discover an even quieter source of power, one that does not demand louder words or greater effort. Instead, it teaches you why the strongest leaders are often the calmest people in the room. Because the greatest victories are not won through force. They are won through stillness. And that is where our journey leads next. To Chapter 3, The Quiet Mind Holds the Greatest Power. Walk into almost any room where people are arguing and something interesting happens. The loudest voice usually appears to be the strongest. The person speaking the fastest seems the most certain. The one interrupting everyone else looks as though they are in control. For a moment, it is convincing, until someone enters the room who says almost nothing. They listen. They observe. When they finally speak, everyone becomes quiet, not because they shouted louder, because their words carried weight. There's a kind of strength that never needs to announce itself. It is quiet, and because it is quiet, many people overlook it. From the time we are children, we are taught that action creates results. Move faster, work harder, talk more, do more, push more. Yet some of the most important decisions in life are not improved by speed. They are improved by stillness. Think about the last decision you deeply regretted. Perhaps you answered a message while you were angry. You accept an opportunity because you feared missing out. You ended a friendship in the heat of an argument. You made a purchase you didn't really need. Now ask yourself something. Was the mistake caused by a lack of intelligence or by a lack of space between the feeling and the action? Very often, the problem was never the decision. It was the speed. Imagine dropping a stone into a perfectly still lake. The ripples spread across the surface in every direction. Now imagine trying to see your reflection while those ripples continue moving. You cannot, not because the water is broken, because it has not yet become still. The human mind behaves much the same way. When it is disturbed by fear, anger, excitement, jealousy, or urgency, reality becomes distorted, not intentionally, simply because emotional movement changes what you are able to see. Many people spend their lives trying to change the world around them when what they really need is a quieter surface within themselves. There is a story about an old craftsman who repaired expensive watches. People travel from distant cities because his work was extraordinary. One day, a young apprentice asked him, "What is your secret?" The old man smiled but said nothing. Instead, he handed the apprentice a tiny watch filled with hundreds of delicate gears. The apprentice immediately began taking it apart. His hands moved quickly. He rushed. Several tiny springs flew across the room. The watch stopped working completely. The old man then picked up another watch. Before touching it, he closed his eyes for a few moments. He took one slow breath. Only then did he begin. Every movement was deliberate. Every adjustment seemed effortless. Hours later, the watch ticked perfectly. The apprentice finally understood. The difference was not skill alone. It was a state of mind that guided the hands. How often do you approach your own life like the apprentice? Someone sends an unexpected email. You react immediately. A disagreement appears. You rush to defend yourself. A problem arrives. You convince yourself something must be done right now. Urgency creates an illusion. It tells you that immediate action is always intelligent action. It rarely is. Sometimes the wisest decision is not the fastest one. Sometimes your greatest advantage is the willingness to wait long enough for your thoughts to become clear. Consider an archer preparing to release an arrow. If their breathing is uneven, the aim changes. If their hands tremble, the target becomes difficult to hit. The goal has not moved. Only the archer has. Your goals rarely disappear because they are impossible. More often, they disappear because the person pursuing them becomes emotionally unstable. One week you feel unstoppable. The next week you question everything. Then motivation returns. Then doubt follows again. Life begins to resemble a boat tossed by changing waves. Not because the destination is uncertain, but because the captain responds to every wave instead of steering beyond it. Perhaps you have noticed that the busiest mind is not always the wisest mind. Some people are constantly thinking, planning, worrying, predicting, remembering, imagining conversations that have not happened, replaying conversations that ended days ago. From the outside, it appears productive. Inside, it is exhausting. Movement should never be mistaken for progress. A hamster runs all day, yet never leaves its wheel. Thoughts can become exactly the same. Constant activity without meaningful direction. Imagine entering a library containing every book ever written. Thousands upon thousands of voices fill the shelves. If every book began shouting at the same time, knowledge would become impossible. Wisdom requires silence. Your mind is similar. Every memory wants attention. Every fear wants attention. Every unfinished task wants attention. Every opinion wants attention. If all of them speak at once, you lose the ability to hear what actually matters. The quiet mind is not empty. It is organized. There is an interesting habit shared by people who seem emotionally steady. When something unexpected happens, they rarely respond immediately. Instead, they become curious. Rather than asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they quietly ask, "What am I not seeing yet?" That single question changes everything. Curiosity interrupts panic. It creates room for understanding. The mind cannot remain completely consumed by fear while it is genuinely exploring. Curiosity becomes a doorway through which calm quietly enters. Think about a photographer adjusting the focus of a camera. Turn the lens too quickly, the image becomes blurred. Move patiently. Suddenly, every detail appears. Nothing outside the camera changed. Only the focus. Life often feels overwhelming for the same reason. Not because there are too many problems. Because your attention has become scattered across too many directions. Where attention goes, energy quietly follows. A quiet mind learns to place attention intentionally, instead of allowing attention to be stolen by whatever shouts the loudest. A wise carpenter never blames a wood before checking the sharpness of the blade. If every cut becomes difficult, the first question is not, what's wrong with the timber? It is, has my tool become dull? Your mind is a primary tool with which you experience reality. Yet most people spend years improving everything except the tool itself. They upgrade their phone, their wardrobe, their car, their career. Meanwhile, their attention becomes increasingly fragmented. Their patience grows thinner. Their reactions become quicker. And then they wonder why life feels heavier. Perhaps the problem is not life. Perhaps the tool needs sharpening. Imagine carrying a glass filled to the very edge with water. One unexpected bump, and water spills everywhere. Now imagine carrying the same glass only half full. The same bump happens. Almost nothing spills. Many people believe life is responsible for every emotional spill, but often the spill simply reveals how full a mind already was. One small inconvenience, one careless comment, one delayed train, one unexpected bill. Suddenly everything overflows. The event was merely the bump. The pressure already existed. A quiet mind does not prevent life's bumps. It creates enough space that they no longer determine your direction. Here is something that surprises many people. Silence is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of unnecessary struggle with thought. Clouds still pass through the sky. You simply stop chasing every cloud. Thoughts still appear. You simply stop treating every thought as a command. This changes the relationship you have with yourself. Instead of being dragged behind every emotion, you begin observing it. Instead of becoming every passing thought, you become the person capable of choosing which thoughts deserve attention. That quiet shift is where genuine freedom begins. But there is one place where even the quietest minds are tested. Not in peaceful mornings, not during moments of solitude, but in the presence of other people. Because nothing reveals the state of your inner world more quickly than another human being. A single criticism, a careless insult, an unexpected betrayal can instantly awaken parts of yourself you thought had disappeared. And that is where the next lesson begins. Because the greatest challenge is not finding silence when you are alone. It is protecting that silence when the world refuses to be quiet. There is a moment that reveals the state of your mind more honestly than almost any other. It happens when someone says something you did not expect. Perhaps they question your abilities. Perhaps they ignore your effort. Perhaps they misunderstand your intentions. In that instant, you have no time to prepare, no opportunity to rehearse. Whatever rises first has been living inside you long before the conversation began. Many people believe difficult people create their anger. More often, difficult people reveal where anger was already waiting. Imagine carrying a cup filled to the very top with coffee. Someone accidentally bumps your shoulder. The coffee spills onto the floor. Why did it spill? Not because you were bumped, because coffee was inside the cup. If the cup had contained water, water would have spilled instead. Life bumps every one of us. Unexpected criticism, delayed plans, broken promises, traffic, failure, disappointment. These moments do not create what is inside you. They reveal it. And once you understand that, every difficult moment becomes less of an interruption and more of a mirror. There was once a stonemason known throughout his village for carving statues of extraordinary beauty. People often asked how he created such peaceful faces from rough blocks of granite. He always gave the same answer. "I don't create the calm," he would say. "I remove everything that doesn't belong." That answer puzzled everyone, until one day a young apprentice watched him work. The mason did not attack the stone with force. He chipped away patiently. Again, and again, and again. Hours passed before the face began to appear. Character grows in exactly the same way. Peace is rarely something added to your life. More often, it appears when unnecessary fear, unnecessary pride, unnecessary resentment, and unnecessary noise are gradually removed. Many people spend years trying to become mentally stronger. They imagine strength as adding more confidence, more discipline, more knowledge, more techniques. Yet perhaps strength is sometimes subtraction, less comparison, less overthinking, less need for approval, less arguing with reality. When a room becomes cluttered, you do not create space by building another room. You create space by removing what no longer belongs there. The mind follows the same principle. Think about the last time you tried to win an argument, not because the truth mattered, but because your pride did. Notice how exhausting that feels. Hours later, the conversation continues inside your head. You imagine better responses, smarter replies, sharper comebacks. Meanwhile, the other person may have forgotten the conversation entirely. You remain trapped in a battle that exists nowhere except your own imagination. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to continue a fight that only one person is still fighting. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with stones. Every insult becomes another stone. Every disappointment becomes another. Every old regret, every embarrassment, every betrayal. At first, one stone seems manageable. Then another. Years pass. Eventually you tell yourself, life feels so heavy. Perhaps life is not the only thing you are carrying. Perhaps you have become loyal to burdens you no longer need. Not because they serve you, because they have become familiar. And familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. There is an interesting difference between noise and signal. Walk through a crowded city. Car horns, conversations, construction, sirens, music. Everything competes for your attention. Now imagine trying to hear a single violin in the distance. Impossible. Not because the violin is silent, because the noise overwhelms it. Your deepest values often resemble that violin. They are rarely the loudest voice inside you. Fear shouts, ego shouts, impulse shouts, comparison shouts. But wisdom almost always speaks quietly. If your inner world is constantly crowded, you will struggle to hear it. Consider a mountain lake just before sunrise. The surface is perfectly still. The surrounding trees appear reflected with astonishing clarity. Now throw handful after handful of rocks into the water. The reflection disappears. The mountains did not move. The trees did not change. Only the surface became disturbed. How often do we assume life itself has become confusing, when in reality, our own mental waters have simply become restless? Clarity rarely arrives because reality changes. It arrives because disturbance settles. One of the greatest misunderstandings about emotional control is believing it means suppressing emotions. It does not. Imagine placing a beach ball beneath the surface of a swimming pool. For a while, you can keep it underwater. But the harder you push, the stronger it fights to rise. Eventually, it bursts back to the surface with even greater force. Emotions behave much the same way. Ignoring them rarely removes them. Pretending they do not exist rarely heals them. A quiet mind does not imprison emotion. It welcomes it, listens to it, then decides whether it deserves to influence the next decision. That difference is everything. There is a farmer who knows that storms cannot be controlled. Some seasons bring gentle rain. Others bring hail, strong winds, unexpected drought. The farmer wastes no energy arguing with the sky. Instead, he asks a different question. What kind of roots am I growing? Because deep roots remain steady even when the weather changes. Your values are those roots. If they are shallow, every opinion shakes you. Every criticism unsettles you. Every setback changes your direction. But when your roots grow deep, the weather still changes. You simply stop changing with every storm. Think about someone whose presence immediately puts others at ease. They are not always the funniest, not always the smartest, not always the most successful, yet being around them feels strangely peaceful. Why? Because they are not constantly trying to prove themselves. They are fully present. They listen without planning their next sentence. They speak without rushing. Their attention rests where they are, not where their anxiety wants them to be. That kind of presence cannot be imitated. It is earned quietly, one calm moment at a time. Perhaps this is the greatest secret of influence. People are rarely inspired by those who control every situation. They are drawn toward those who remain composed when situations cannot be controlled. Calm is contagious. Just as panic spreads through a crowd, peace spreads too. One person's stillness often becomes permission for everyone else to breathe again. That is why the quietest leader in the room sometimes changes the entire room without raising their voice. Imagine a lighthouse standing on a rugged coastline. Every winter, powerful waves crash against its foundation. The wind howls, the sea rises, ships disappear into darkness. Yet the lighthouse never chases a storm. It never argues with the ocean. It simply continues shining. Its strength does not come from resisting every wave. It comes from remaining anchored while the waves pass. Your mind was never meant to eliminate every challenge. It was meant to become an anchor within them. There will always be people who misunderstand you, moments when fear visits unexpectedly, days when uncertainty arrives without invitation. The quiet mind does not pretend these moments are pleasant. It simply refuses to surrender leadership to them, because once your inner world becomes stable, the outer world loses much its power to disturb you. And when that happens, something extraordinary begins to emerge. Not louder words, not greater confidence. Something even more powerful, an unshakable sense of direction. Because the person who has learned to master silence eventually discovers another remarkable truth. Discipline is no longer something they force themselves to practice. It becomes part of who they are. And that is where our journey continues. 2. Chapter 4. Discipline creates the person motivation never can. There's a quiet misunderstanding that has stolen years from countless lives. People wait to feel ready. They wait to feel inspired. They wait for confidence, for energy, for the perfect morning, the perfect opportunity, the perfect mood. They believe these feelings are the beginning of change. But if you watch life closely enough, you begin to notice something surprising. The people who accomplish the most are rarely the ones who feel motivated the most. They are the ones who have stopped negotiating with every emotion that visits them. Imagine a farmer standing at the edge of his field just before sunrise. Dark clouds hang overhead. The air feels cold. His body is tired. Nothing inside him whispers, "Today is a perfect day to work." Yet he picks up his tools anyway. Not because he enjoys every moment, because the crops do not grow according to his feelings. They grow according to his consistency. Weeks later, when the harvest arrives, people admire the abundance. Very few think about the mornings when no inspiration existed. The harvest was never created in one extraordinary day. It was created in hundreds of ordinary ones. Many people imagine discipline as something harsh, cold, rigid, almost like a prison. But perhaps discipline has been misunderstood. Imagine standing beside a river. Without its banks, the water spreads in every direction. It becomes shallow, chaotic. It loses its power. The banks do not imprison the river. They give it direction. That direction allows it to carve valleys, turn turbines, carry ships, and sustain entire cities. Discipline is the riverbank of human potential. It does not restrict your life. It gives your energy somewhere meaningful to flow. Think back to your childhood. There were probably mornings when you didn't feel like going to school, days when you wanted to stay in bed, evenings when homework felt impossible. Yet, somehow, those ordinary routines slowly shaped abilities you now take for granted. You learned to read, to write, to solve problems, not because every lesson was exciting, but because repetition quietly transformed effort into ability. The same principle never stopped working. Only the classroom changed. Now life itself has become the teacher. There is an interesting difference between a campfire and a lighthouse. A campfire burns brightly for a while. People gather around it. It creates excitement, warmth, energy. Then eventually, the flames grow smaller. The fire disappears. A lighthouse behaves differently. It does not burn dramatically. It burns consistently, night after night, storm after storm. Its purpose is not excitement. Its purpose is reliability. Motivation often resembles a campfire. Discipline resembles the lighthouse. One inspires movement. The other sustains direction. Have you ever purchased a notebook with the intention of changing your life? The first page is beautiful. Your handwriting is careful. Every goal feels possible. A week later, the notebook sits untouched on a shelf. The excitement disappeared. What happened? Nothing mysterious. The emotional energy that began the journey naturally faded. That is what emotions do. They rise. They fall. Expecting them to remain constant is like expecting sunrise to last all day. The problem is not that motivation fades. The problem is building your future on something that was never designed to stay. Imagine building a house on the sand beside the ocean. The view is beautiful. The location feels exciting. But each tide quietly shifts the ground beneath the foundation. Months later, cracks begin appearing in the walls. Now imagine building the same house on solid rock. Storms still arrive. Wind still blows. Rain still falls. Yet the foundation remains unchanged. Many people build their lives on emotional sand. I'll work when I feel inspired. I'll forgive when I feel ready. I'll begin when I'm confident. Discipline chooses a different foundation. I'll do what matters because it matters, not because today's emotions approve. There was once a violin maker who spent nearly 40 years building instruments. Visitors often watched him work. What surprised them most was not his skill. It was his routine. He arrived at the workshop at the same hour every morning, prepared his tools in the same order, worked patiently, stopped at nearly the same time each evening. Someone eventually asked, "Don't you ever get bored?" The old craftsman smiled. "If I waited until I felt inspired," he replied, "I would have built very few violins." Instead, his routine created space for inspiration to find him. Many people believe inspiration creates disciplined work. More often, disciplined work creates inspiration. Think about brushing your teeth. You probably do not stand in front of the mirror debating whether it feels exciting. You simply do it. The decision no longer consumes energy. It has become part of who you are. Imagine if every healthy habit reached that point. Reading, exercising, listening carefully, managing your finances wisely, keeping promises, being patient under pressure. The goal of discipline is not to make every task difficult. It is to remove the daily argument, because arguments drain energy. Decisions repeated long enough become identity. Identity requires far less effort than constant negotiation. There is another illusion quietly shaping modern life. It tells us that freedom means having no structure, no obligations, no routines, no limits. At first, that sounds appealing. But imagine an orchestra where every musician plays whatever they feel like playing. One violin begins early. The drums ignore the conductor. The piano changes songs halfway through. Each musician enjoys complete freedom. The result is not music. It is noise. Real freedom often emerges from meaningful structure. The pianist becomes free because they practice scales for years. The athlete becomes free because thousands of repetitions built instinct. The speaker becomes free because preparation removed uncertainty. Structure does not eliminate freedom. It makes excellence possible. Perhaps that is why promises made to yourself matter differently from promises made to others. If you promise a friend you will meet them at 7 o'clock, you probably arrive. If you promise yourself you will wake up early tomorrow, the negotiation begins immediately. No one will know. 30 more minutes. I'll start Monday. Every broken promise quietly teaches your mind something, not merely about schedules, but about trust. Trust is not built through words. It is built through evidence. Every promise you keep tells your mind, "My words have weight." Every promise you abandon tells it something else. Over time, that invisible conversation becomes a foundation of self-respect. Imagine trying to withdraw money from a bank account that has never received deposits. Soon, the account becomes empty. Confidence works much the same way. People often wish for more confidence before taking action, but confidence is earned differently. Each disciplined action becomes another deposit. One difficult conversation handled well, one early morning honored, one temptation resisted, one commitment completed. Eventually, you discover something remarkable. You trust yourself, not because someone encouraged you, because your own actions repeatedly proved you could be trusted. There is a quiet dignity in becoming the kind of person who follows through, not for applause, not for recognition, simply because your actions and your values have become friends instead of strangers. The world notices achievements. It celebrates results. But beneath every meaningful accomplishment lies an invisible pattern. Someone continued after excitement faded. Someone remained steady when nobody was watching. Someone quietly returned the next day, and the next, and the next, long after motivation had packed its bags and disappeared. But there is an even deeper reason discipline changes a person. It is not only about what you accomplish. It changes how you see yourself, because every repeated action quietly answers one question: what kind of person am I becoming? And once that answer begins to change, everything else begins changing with it. That is where our journey goes next, because discipline does far more than shape your schedule. It slowly reshapes your identity until effort itself begins to feel completely different. There comes a point in every meaningful journey when excitement quietly leaves. No announcement, no warning. One morning, you simply wake up and the work feels ordinary. The goal that once filled your mind with energy now feels distant. The habit that once seemed exciting now feels repetitive. The progress appears slower than you expected. This is the moment where most people unknowingly make the same mistake. They assume something has gone wrong. It hasn't. They have simply arrived at the place where discipline finally takes over. Think about learning to walk. As a child, every step required enormous effort. You stumbled, you fell, you reached for support, yet you never questioned whether walking was worth learning. You simply stood up again. Eventually, something remarkable happened. Walking stopped being something you did. It became part of who you were. No one congratulates themselves for walking across a room. It has become identity. This is the hidden purpose of discipline. It transforms effort into identity. There is a sculptor who spends months working on a single block of marble. Visitors often arrive at the workshop and see only dust on the floor. The statue appears almost unchanged. One visitor eventually asks, "How do you stay motivated when nothing seems to be happening?" The sculptor smiles. "I'm not waiting for the statue to appear," he says. "I'm becoming the kind of craftsman who can create it." That answer contains a truth most people overlook. The greatest reward for disciplined action is rarely the result. It is the person created while pursuing it. Many people chase outcomes, lose the weight, earn more money, write the book, build the business, become the leader. Those are worthwhile goals. But outcomes can be deceptive. If your happiness depends entirely on reaching the finish line, every step before it feels like waiting, life becomes something you tolerate until success finally arrives. Discipline offers a different way to live. It teaches you to value becoming, not merely arriving, because becoming is something you can practice today. Think about a tree standing in the middle of an open field. No one notices it growing. There is no dramatic sound when another ring forms inside its trunk. Each season appears almost identical to the last. Yet year after year, the roots deepen, the trunk thickens, the branches reach farther into the sky. Growth is often invisible while it is happening. Only time reveals what consistency has quietly accomplished. Character follows the same rhythm. The changes are too small to impress you today, but impossible to ignore 5 years later. One of the greatest obstacles to discipline is comparison. You see someone who appears farther ahead. They speak with confidence. Their work seems effortless. Their success appears natural. You begin asking the wrong question. Why am I not there yet? Instead, ask, what invisible years am I not seeing? Every accomplished person has lived through ordinary Tuesdays, quiet mornings, failed attempts, lonely evenings, boring repetitions. The world celebrates finished buildings. It rarely photographs the scaffolding. There is another trap that quietly steals discipline. It is called perfection. Perfection sounds noble, but it often disguises fear. You miss one workout, then convince yourself the entire week is ruined. You break one healthy habit, then abandon the month. You make one mistake, then question your entire journey. Perfection believes one imperfect day destroys everything. Discipline quietly replies, then begin again. One sentence builds shame. The other builds resilience, and resilience always outlasts perfection. A clock does not ring because it feels inspired. The sun does not rise because it is emotionally ready. The seasons do not pause until they regain confidence. Nature follows rhythm, not emotion. There is wisdom in that. The most dependable things in life are not governed by changing feelings. They are guided by steady patterns. Perhaps human beings are not so different. Your greatest strength may never come from extraordinary bursts of effort. It may come from becoming someone who returns again and again, regardless of mood. There is a quiet confidence that cannot be borrowed from praise. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be given by another person. It grows each time you keep a promise that nobody else knew you made. You said you would wake up earlier, and you did. You said you would finish the work, and you did. You said you would remain calm, and you did. These moments appear small, yet they leave powerful evidence behind. Your mind begins collecting proof that your words mean something. Eventually, you stop wondering whether you can trust yourself. You already know the answer. Many people spend years trying to change their future. Very few realize they first need to change their standards. Goals tell you where you hope to go. Standards determine where you actually live. A person may dream of writing a novel, but if they only write when inspiration visits, the dream remains a dream. Another person quietly writes one page every day. At first, nothing seems different. Months later, one has an idea. The other has a manuscript. The difference was never talent alone. It was a standard they chose to live by. Think of a lighthouse standing on a rugged coastline. Every evening, as darkness falls, its light begins to shine. It does not ask whether the sea is calm. It does not wait for sailors to praise it. It does not postpone its purpose because the weather is unpleasant. It simply fulfills the role it was built to fulfill. Day after day, year after year, there is something deeply peaceful about becoming that dependable, not only for others, but for yourself. Perhaps that is what discipline truly is. Not punishment, not endless self-denial. It is self-respect expressed through consistent action. Every disciplined choice quietly says, my future deserves today's effort. Every repeated action becomes a vote, not merely for a habit, but for an identity. Eventually, the question changes. You no longer ask, should I do this today? Instead, you ask, what would someone like me naturally do? That is the moment discipline stops feeling heavy. It has become character. One day, people may look at your life and describe you with simple words. Reliable, patient, focused, calm, disciplined. They may assume you were born that way. Only you will know the truth. Those qualities were not gifts. They were built through countless invisible decisions that no one witnessed. The mornings when comfort lost. The evenings when excuses were ignored. The ordinary days when nothing felt extraordinary, yet you continued anyway. That is where remarkable lives are quietly built. But discipline alone is not enough. There is another force that determines whether disciplined actions continue or slowly fade away. It is more subtle than routines, more powerful than motivation, and it quietly shapes every decision before you even become aware of making it. Because before your actions become consistent, your standards must become unshakable. That is where our journey leads next. Chapter 5. Build standards that lead you automatically. Every life is governed by invisible rules. Not the rules written in books. Not the rules society gives you. The quiet rules you have accepted without even realizing it. One person believes being 5 minutes late is acceptable. Another believes arriving early is simply who they are. One person believes quitting is understandable when life becomes difficult. Another believes finishing what they begin is non-negotiable. Neither person stops each morning to debate these choices. Their standards have already decided for them. That is the hidden power of standards. They make decisions before decisions ever arrive. Many people spend years chasing better results. Few spend time examining the invisible standards producing those results. Suppose two gardeners receive identical seeds. They have the same tools, the same amount of land, the same weather. Months later, one garden is thriving while the other struggles. At first glance, it seems like luck, but watch closely. One gardener removes weeds every morning. The other waits until they become impossible to ignore. One waters consistently. The other waters only when the plants begin to wilt. The harvest was never determined by hope. It was determined by standards. Standards quietly answer one question every day. What is acceptable? That question shapes far more of your life than ambition ever will. If it is acceptable to ignore your health, your body slowly reflects that decision. If it is acceptable to break promises to yourself, your confidence quietly weakens. If it is acceptable to waste hours each day, your future begins shrinking without making a sound. The opposite is equally true. Raise your standards, and your daily choices begin changing without requiring constant motivation. Think about a pilot preparing an aircraft before takeoff. Thousands of passengers trust that flight, yet the pilot does not rely on memory, or confidence, or luck. Every flight begins with the same checklist, the same sequence, the same careful inspection. Why? Because standards protect people from emotions. A tired pilot follows the checklist. A confident pilot follows a checklist. An experienced pilot follows a checklist. The standard remains unchanged, regardless of how anyone feels. There is wisdom in that. The strongest parts of your character should never depend on today's mood. Consider the way a master chef works inside a busy kitchen. During dinner service, orders arrive from every direction. The room is noisy. Time is limited. Pressure builds. Yet the chef continues following the same disciplined process. Not because it is exciting, because the process protects quality. If every meal depended on inspiration, very few customers would return. Excellence is rarely created by extraordinary moments. It is protected by ordinary standards. One of the greatest mistakes people make is confusing goals with standards. A goal says, I want to become healthy. A standard says, I do not skip movement because this is how I care for my body. A goal says, I want to write a book. A standard says, I write every day, even when the words come slowly. A goal points toward a destination. A standard determines how you travel. One inspires you briefly. The other quietly shapes every day that follows. There's an old clockmaker who repairs antique clocks. Visitors often admire the beautiful wooden cases and polished brass hands. The clockmaker pays attention somewhere else. He watches the tiny gears hidden inside. People admire what they can see, he says. I repair what they cannot. Human character is much the same. The world notices achievements. It notices promotions, awards, recognition, success. But beneath every visible success are hidden standards operating quietly every day. The gears determine whether the clock keeps time. Your standard determines whether your life keeps direction. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to lower your standards one small step at a time? You decide to wake up 30 minutes later. Tomorrow becomes an hour. One skipped workout becomes 2. One unfinished task becomes several. One careless promise becomes a habit. Rarely do people abandon excellence in a single dramatic decision. More often, they slowly redefine what they're willing to tolerate. The decline feels almost invisible, until one day they look around and wonder, when did this become normal? The answer is simple. Normal changes every time your standards do. There's another side to this truth that is deeply encouraging. Progress also begins quietly. One evening you decide your phone no longer belongs at the dinner table. Soon conversations become deeper. Another day you decide every promise deserves your best effort. People slowly begin trusting you more. You decide to speak honestly even when honesty feels uncomfortable. Respect quietly follows. Small standards become powerful because they repeat themselves. A single choice may change very little. Repeated choices slowly reshape an entire life. A sculptor does not strike marble randomly. Every movement serves a vision already living inside the artist's mind. Without that vision, the hammer becomes destructive. With it, the same hammer creates beauty. Standards work the same way. They are not random rules meant to make life difficult. They are deliberate choices that protect the person you are trying to become. Without standards, life reacts to circumstances. With standards, life responds from intention. There's something fascinating about elite athletes. Long before competition begins, their preparation has already determined much of the outcome. They sleep according to a schedule. They train consistently. They recover intentionally. They eat with purpose. None of these actions guarantee victory, but they guarantee readiness. Life rewards readiness more often than talent. Opportunities rarely announce themselves weeks in advance. They simply appear, and when they do, your standards determine whether you are prepared to receive them. Perhaps the most important standard you will ever build has nothing to do with money, or achievement, or recognition. It is a standard for how you treat yourself when you fall short. Many people become their own harshest critic. One mistake becomes proof of failure. One setback becomes evidence they are not enough. But standards rooted in wisdom sound different. They say, I will take responsibility. I will learn. I will begin again, without excuses, without self-contempt. Because growth has never required perfection, only honesty. There is quiet freedom in reaching a point where your decisions require less debate. You no longer ask whether integrity is worth it, whether discipline is convenient, whether kindness depends on another person's behavior. The answers have already been decided, not by emotion, but by standards you have chosen to live by. That is when life becomes simpler, not because it becomes easier, but because fewer decisions remain open for negotiation. Still, there is one question every person must eventually answer. Where do these standards come from? Do they come from parents, society, friends, success, failure? Or is there a deeper source from which truly unshakable standards are born? The answer changes everything. Because once your standards are built on the right foundation, you no longer need constant willpower to stay on course. Your identity begins leading you automatically, and that is where we continue next. Every identity begins with a quiet decision, not the decision to become successful, not the decision to become wealthy, not even the decision to become disciplined. It begins with something much smaller, the decision about what you will no longer accept from yourself. That moment rarely attracts attention. There is no applause, no celebration, no dramatic transformation, only a silent line drawn within your own heart. From that day forward, certain behaviors no longer belong to the person you are becoming. There is an old bridge that has carried travelers across the same river for generations. Storms have struck it, floods have tested it, heavy wagons and thousands of footsteps have crossed it, yet the bridge remains. Not because the weather has been kind, because its foundation was built deep beneath the water where no one could see it. Character is built the same way. People admire confidence, discipline, integrity, calmness, but those visible qualities are supported by foundations hidden beneath daily choices. Standards are those foundations. They quietly hold your life together long before anyone notices the structure standing above them. Many people believe changing their life requires making hundreds of different decisions. Often it requires only one, a new standard. I do not lie, even when lying would be easier. I finish what I begin. I protect my health. I speak respectfully, especially when I am angry. Notice something about those statements. They leave very little room for negotiation. Negotiation is exhausting. Standards remove unnecessary conversations before they begin. Think of a train traveling across a country. Once it is placed on the correct tracks, it does not wake up every morning wondering which direction to travel. The tracks quietly decide. Your standards function like those tracks. If your standard is excellence, many decisions disappear. If your standard is honesty, many temptations lose their appeal. If your standard is generosity, many opportunities to serve become obvious. The destination changes because the direction was decided long before the journey began. There is a teacher remembered by generations of students, not because she gave the easiest lessons, not because she demanded perfection, but because every student knew exactly what she stood for. She treated everyone fairly. She prepared carefully. She listened completely before responding. Whether teaching one student or 100, her standard remained unchanged. Consistency built trust. Trust built influence. Influence changed lives. People are rarely transformed by occasional greatness. They are transformed by dependable character. One reason people struggle to maintain good habits is that they rely too heavily on decisions. Every morning becomes another debate. Should I exercise? Should I read? Should I save money? Should I practice patience today? Every debate drains energy. Eventually, the easiest answer wins. Standards eliminate many of those debates. You no longer ask, should I? You simply remember, this is who I am. Identity is far less tiring than constant decision-making. Consider a lighthouse keeper. Every evening, before darkness falls, the lamp is inspected, the glass is cleaned, the fuel is checked, the light is prepared, not because ships are visible. Often the sea appears completely empty, but the keeper understands something important. Preparation happens before it becomes necessary. Waiting until the storm arrives is already too late. The same principle applies to your character. Integrity is built before temptation appears. Patience is practiced before conflict begins. Courage is developed before fear arrives. Your standards prepare you for moments you cannot predict. There is another hidden advantage to living by strong standards. Peace. When your values are clear, life becomes remarkably simpler. You spend less time wondering how to respond, less time seeking approval, less time comparing yourself to others, not because questions disappear, but because your compass has already been calibrated. Imagine hiking through a dense forest. The path twists in every direction. Without a compass, every turn creates uncertainty. With one, you still walk the same forest, but confusion loses much of its power. Standards become that compass, not eliminating difficulty, only removing unnecessary confusion. Perhaps the greatest danger is not failure. It is slowly becoming comfortable with less than your own potential. That process rarely announces itself. It happens quietly. You stop reading. You stop learning. You stop asking difficult questions. You begin choosing convenience over growth. One day, you realize your life has become smaller, not because opportunity disappeared, because your standards gradually shrank to match your comfort. Comfort is rarely satisfied. The more room you give it, the more it quietly asks for. There is a gardener who prunes healthy branches every spring. To an observer, it seems wasteful. Why remove something that is already growing? The gardener understands what others do not. Without pruning, energy becomes scattered, growth becomes weaker, fruit becomes smaller. Standards require similar courage. Sometimes growth demands saying no, even to good opportunities. Not every invitation deserves your attention. Not every argument deserves your response. Not every opportunity deserves your time. Your standards teach you what to protect, because every yes is also a quiet no to something else. As the years pass, something remarkable begins to happen. Your habits become predictable. Your character becomes dependable. People begin describing you with words that once felt distant. Reliable, wise, patient, honest, focused. They assume these qualities appeared naturally. Only you know how many unseen decisions created them. Every ordinary morning, every uncomfortable choice, every promise honored when nobody else would have known if you had broken it. Those invisible moments become visible character. Then one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, you stop chasing discipline. You stop forcing consistency. You stop trying to become someone different. You simply live according to the standards you have chosen. Action follows identity almost effortlessly, not because life has become easy, but because your inner world has become aligned. Your values, your choices, and your daily actions now move in the same direction. There is very little friction left inside you. That harmony is one of the greatest forms of freedom a person can experience. But there is still one lesson that separates ordinary lives from extraordinary ones. Even people with strong standards will encounter fear. uncertainty, failure, unexpected loss. The question is no longer whether fear will visit. It will. The real question is this: who remains in control when fear arrives? Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is something far more profound. And that is where our journey continues. Chapter 6. Courage is choosing your values over your fear. Fear has an interesting way of introducing itself. It rarely announces, "I am here to stop your dreams." Instead, it arrives wearing much friendlier clothes. It calls itself caution, practicality, timing, comfort. It whispers, "Maybe next year." Wait until you're more confident. What if people laugh? What if you fail? The voice sounds reasonable, almost intelligent. That is why fear is so persuasive. It doesn't always shout. Very often, it politely asks you to postpone your life. Most people think courage feels powerful, as though brave people wake each morning overflowing with confidence. But speak to firefighters, surgeons, pilots, entrepreneurs, parents, teachers, anyone who has carried great responsibility. You discover something surprising. They were afraid too. The difference was never the absence of fear. The difference was deciding that something else mattered more. There was once a young sailor preparing for his very first voyage across the open sea. The night before departure, he barely slept, his mind filled with questions. What if the storm is too strong? What if I make a mistake? What if I never return? At sunrise, he found the old captain calmly preparing the ship. The young sailor confessed, "I'm frightened." The captain smiled. "So am I." The young sailor looked confused. "You still get afraid after all these years?" The captain nodded. Every voyage deserves respect. Then he tightened one final rope and quietly added, "Courage isn't steering without fear. It's refusing to let fear hold the wheel." Those words remained with the young sailor for the rest of his life. Every human being follows a voice. Some follow excitement. Some follow comfort. Some follow approval. Others quietly follow their deepest values. The voice you obey most consistently becomes the architect of your future. If comfort gives the instructions, your world slowly becomes smaller. If fear makes every decision, opportunities quietly disappear. But when values become your guide, something remarkable happens. You begin making decisions that your future self will thank you for, even when your present self feels uncomfortable. Think about standing at the edge of a forest just before sunrise. The path ahead disappears into the trees. You cannot see every turn. You cannot predict every obstacle. You cannot guarantee what waits beyond the next hill. Yet people have walked that same path before, not because certainty existed, because purpose was stronger than uncertainty. Life offers very few roads where everything is visible from the beginning. If certainty becomes your requirement, you may spend your entire life standing at the entrance. Fear has another habit that often goes unnoticed. It loves prediction. Before you've given a presentation, fear predicts embarrassment. Before asking someone for help, fear predicts rejection. Before starting a business, fear predicts failure. Before changing careers, fear predicts regret. Notice something curious. Fear almost always speaks about a future that does not yet exist. It asks you to suffer for events that may never happen. How many sleepless nights have been spent worrying about moments that never arrived? How many opportunities quietly disappeared because imaginary disasters felt real enough to obey? There's an old story about a sculptor searching for the perfect block of marble. He traveled from town to town examining enormous stones. Every block contained a tiny crack, a slight discoloration, a small imperfection. Years passed. He never began carving. Another sculptor selected an imperfect block almost immediately. He worked patiently, adapted to each flaw, created one of the finest statues the city had ever seen. The first sculptor waited for certainty. The second accepted reality. Perfection often delays courage. Acceptance allows it to begin. One of the greatest misunderstandings about bravery is believing it belongs only to extraordinary moments. Standing before thousands of people, rescuing someone in danger, leading a nation. History remembers those moments. Life is built from different ones. The courage to apologize first. The courage to admit you were wrong. The courage to ask for forgiveness. To begin again after failure. To leave a situation that no longer reflects your values. To remain honest when dishonesty would be easier. These quiet moments rarely appear in newspapers, yet they shape the quality of an entire life. There is a difference between being fearless and being free. A fearless person may ignore danger completely. A free person simply refuses to let fear become their master. Freedom is not the disappearance of fear. It is the restoration of choice. You still feel uncertainty. Your heart may still beat faster. Your hands may still tremble. But something deeper quietly says, I choose my values anyway. That single sentence has changed countless lives. Picture a lighthouse standing on a rocky coastline. Every storm arrives with the same determination. Waves crash against the cliffs. Wind howls through the darkness. Rain strikes the windows. The lighthouse cannot stop the storm. It was never built to. Its purpose is different, to continue shining regardless. Your values are that light. Fear is a storm. The goal is not eliminating the weather. The goal is protecting the light. Many people ask, how do I become more courageous? Perhaps the better question is, what matters so deeply that I am willing to feel uncomfortable for it? When purpose becomes clear, fear begins losing its authority. A parent wakes throughout the night for a crying child, not because exhaustion disappears, because love outweighs comfort. A doctor performs difficult surgeries, not because anxiety never appears, because responsibility speaks louder. Every meaningful act of courage begins when one value becomes greater than one fear. Perhaps this explains why some people spend decades trapped by invisible prisons. The prison is not built from steel. It is built from sentences. I'm not ready. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm not talented enough. What will people think? Bars made from beliefs can become stronger than bars made from iron. The tragedy is not that these prisons exist. The tragedy is that many people never discover the door was unlocked all along. One day, you will look back on your life. You will remember moments when fear asked you to remain exactly where you were. Some of those moments you obeyed. Others, you stepped forward anyway. Those steps may have felt small at the time. A difficult conversation, a bold decision, a new beginning. Yet those ordinary acts of courage quietly changed the direction of everything that followed. Because courage has never been measured by the size of the action, only by the willingness to honor your values despite your fear. But there is one kind of fear that challenges every human being more than any other. It is not the fear of failure, nor the fear of uncertainty. It is the fear of losing the approval of other people. And until that fear is understood, many people unknowingly spend their lives living someone else's version of success. That is where our journey continues. There is a fear that quietly shapes more lives than failure ever could. It is the fear of disapproval, the fear of disappointing people, the fear of standing apart, the fear of being misunderstood. From childhood, most of us learn that acceptance feels safe. When we receive praise, we feel secure. When we receive criticism, something inside us begins to question our worth. Without realizing it, many people begin organizing their lives around one invisible question. What will everyone else think? It seems like a harmless question, yet it has prevented countless dreams from ever becoming reality. There was once a young musician whose greatest wish was to perform her own songs. For years, she practiced alone in a small room. Whenever friends visited, they encouraged her, "You should let people hear your music." She always smiled politely. Maybe someday. Years passed. She continued writing songs that no one ever heard. One evening, an elderly violinist asked her, "Who are you protecting?" She looked puzzled. "I'm protecting myself from embarrassment." The old man shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "You are protecting yourself from the possibility of becoming who you were meant to be." Those words followed her long after the conversation ended. She realized something profound. The greatest risk was no longer performing. The greatest risk was remaining hidden forever. Approval is a pleasant gift, but it is a terrible compass. If your direction changes every time someone praises you or criticizes you, then your life no longer belongs to your values. It belongs to public opinion. Public opinion changes constantly. Today's admiration becomes tomorrow's criticism. Today's trend becomes tomorrow's forgotten memory. If you build your identity upon shifting ground, you will spend your life rebuilding. Think about a ship crossing the ocean at night. Clouds hide the stars. Strong winds push against the sails. Massive waves strike the hull. The captain does not change direction every time the sea changes. He trusts the compass. The ocean is temporary. The destination remains. Your values are that compass. Opinions are the weather. One deserves your loyalty. The other merely deserves your awareness. Many people believe courage appears during extraordinary moments. More often, it appears during ordinary conversations. Someone makes a joke that violates your principles. Do you laugh simply because everyone else does? A group pressures you toward a decision that feels wrong. Do you quietly agree? You know the truth. Do you speak? Or remain silent because silence feels safer? Character is rarely tested when everyone agrees with you. It is revealed when standing alone becomes a cause of honesty. There's an old oak tree growing at the edge of a wide valley. Every season brings stronger winds. Smaller trees bend in every direction. Some eventually break. The oak bends too, but only enough to survive. Its roots reach so deeply into the earth that the storm cannot persuade it to abandon where it stands. Your values should grow like those roots, flexible enough to learn, strong enough not to surrender. There is wisdom in listening. There is danger in drifting. One of the quietest forms of courage is changing your mind, not because someone pressured you, but because you discovered a deeper truth. Pride says, I've already chosen. Wisdom quietly asks, what if I've learned something? Many people confuse stubbornness with strength. They hold tightly to ideas that no longer serve them simply because admitting change feels uncomfortable. Real courage is loyal to truth, not to ego. There comes a season in every life when letting go requires more courage than holding on. Letting go of resentment, of unhealthy relationships, of old identities, of outdated dreams, of the need to always appear strong. Holding on often feels easier because it is familiar, but familiar does not always mean faithful to who you are becoming. Sometimes growth asks you to release what once protected you, so something greater can finally emerge. Fear often asks, what if everything goes wrong? Values quietly ask, what if this is exactly the step that changes everything? Neither question knows the future. Both require faith. The difference is where that faith is placed. Fear places faith in disaster. Values place faith in possibility. Every day, without noticing, you are strengthening one of those voices. The one you practice eventually becomes the one you trust. There's something remarkable about mountain climbers. As they ascend higher, the air becomes thinner. The path becomes narrower. Every step requires greater attention. No experienced climber spends the entire journey looking toward the summit. They focus on the next secure foothold, then the next, then another. Courage grows exactly the same way. It is rarely built through one heroic leap. It grows through small acts of faith, repeated consistently. One honest conversation, one difficult decision, one promise kept, one fear faced. The next courageous step becomes easier because the previous one already proved you could take it. Perhaps the greatest reward for courage is not success. Success cannot always be guaranteed. The greatest reward is self-respect. There's profound peace in knowing that your choices reflected your deepest values, even when the outcome was uncertain, even when others disagreed, even when the road became difficult. Failure after courageous action carries far less regret than success achieved by abandoning yourself, because one preserves your integrity, the other quietly trades away. Years from now, very few people will remember every mistake you made. Most have been too busy thinking about their own lives, the conversations you replay in your mind, the moments that still embarrass you, the fears that seem enormous today. Time has a remarkable way of shrinking them. What often remains instead are the moments when you chose courage over comfort. Those moments become turning points, not because they change the world overnight, but because they change the person making the decision. There's a quiet freedom waiting on the other side of fear, not because fear disappears. It probably never will, but because it no longer occupies the highest seat in your life. Your values do. Once that happens, fear becomes a passenger instead of the driver. It may still whisper, it may still warn, but it no longer decides where you go. That decision belongs to you. Yet courage alone cannot sustain a meaningful life. There is another force that quietly multiplies every courageous choice. It determines whether your efforts remain scattered or begin creating a lasting legacy. Because the greatest lives are not built by dramatic moments. They are built by the small actions repeated every single day. And that is where our journey continues. Chapter 7. Small daily actions shape extraordinary lives. History often remembers extraordinary moments. A championship won, a company was built, a book published, a life-changing discovery. The world applauds a finish line. Almost no one witnesses the thousands of ordinary days that quietly made those moments possible. The applause lasts a few minutes. The preparation often lasts years. That is a part of success most people never see. There is a common belief that remarkable lives are created by remarkable decisions. Occasionally they are. More often, they are created by ordinary decisions repeated so consistently that they eventually become extraordinary. One page read every day, one honest conversation, one healthy meal, one promise kept, one act of kindness, 1 hour of focused work. None of these actions seem powerful on their own. Yet time has a remarkable ability to multiply what consistency provides. There was an elderly gardener whose flowers attracted visitors from neighboring towns. People admired the vibrant colors and the perfect rows of blooming plants. One visitor finally asked, "What fertilizer do you use?" The gardener smiled. "I've used many over the years." "No," the visitor replied. "There must be a secret." The old gardener knelt beside a tiny seedling. "My secret is this," he said softly. "I never expect today's work to bloom tomorrow." Then he gently watered the soil. Most people stop watering because they cannot yet see flowers. He looked across the garden. "I keep watering because I already believe they are coming." That belief changed everything. Life often rewards those who understand delayed results. Plant a seed today. Nothing changes tomorrow. Exercise once. Your body looks the same. Read one chapter. You do not suddenly become wise. Save $10. You are not wealthy. The first effort rarely changes your life. The second hardly does either. But after enough quiet repetitions, the invisible begins becoming visible. That is how extraordinary lives are built, not through dramatic breakthroughs, through patient accumulation. Think about a mason building a cathedral. He places one stone, then another, then another. Years pass. Some workers never live long enough to see the completed building, yet every carefully placed stone matters. None of them are unnecessary. Character develops the same way. Patience is one stone, integrity another, discipline another, courage another, humility another. No single stone creates greatness. Together, they become a life capable of withstanding storms. One of the greatest frustrations in personal growth is that progress rarely feels proportional to effort. You work hard today. The results seem invisible. Tomorrow, still invisible. The following week, almost nothing appears different. Many people quit at exactly this point, not because they lack ability, because they mistake invisible progress for no progress. There is a quiet season where roots grow before branches appear. The roots are hidden. That does not make them unimportant. In fact, without them, nothing lasting could ever grow above the surface. A watchmaker spends hours adjusting gears, so tiny that most people cannot even see them. One slight adjustment changes the accuracy of the entire clock. Life works similarly. People search for one massive change that transforms everything. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins with one tiny adjustment. Going to bed 30 minutes earlier. Reading instead of endlessly scrolling. Speaking more kindly. Listening before responding. Finishing one task before starting another. Small improvements often look insignificant, until they are repeated hundreds of times. There is another truth that quietly changes everything. Every action casts a vote, not merely for an outcome, but for an identity. Every morning you choose movement. You vote for becoming a healthy person. Every time you tell the truth, you vote for becoming trustworthy. Every time you remain patient during frustration, you vote for becoming emotionally steady. One vote rarely decides an election. Neither does one action define your character. Identity is formed through accumulated evidence. Every decision contributes another piece. Many people underestimate the power of ordinary mornings. The first hour often whispers to the remaining 23. Wake up hurried. The day often continues in haste. Wake up intentionally. The day begins with direction. This does not mean every morning must be perfect. Life will interrupt your plans. Unexpected responsibilities will arise. The goal is not perfection. The goal is beginning your day instead of allowing the day to begin you. Those are two very different ways to live. There is a carpenter known for crafting furniture that lasts for generations. One apprentice noticed something unusual. The carpenter spent almost as much time sharpening his tools as he did cutting wood. The apprentice finally asked, "Wouldn't you finish faster if you simply kept working?" The carpenter smiled. "A dull blade creates more effort." Then he added, "The wisest workers don't only protect the work, they protect the worker." Many people push themselves endlessly. Very few take time to renew themselves. Rest is not the enemy of discipline. Purposeful recovery is one of its greatest partners. A sharp mind accomplishes more than an exhausted one. There is another mistake that quietly steals progress. People compare their beginning to someone else's middle. You see the author with 10 published books, the athlete with years of training, the confident speaker, the successful entrepreneur. You rarely witness their uncertain first attempts, their awkward beginnings, their forgotten failures. Comparison creates discouragement because it hides the journey while displaying only the destination. Your only meaningful comparison is with the person you were yesterday. If today's actions move you even one step forward, you are already traveling in the right direction. Every sunset quietly closes another page of your life. Whether you use that page wisely or allowed it to disappear unnoticed, time turns it anyway. That thought is not meant to create fear. It is meant to create awareness. You do not need extraordinary days every day. You simply need enough ordinary days lived with intention. Those days quietly gather together until one morning you look back and realize an extraordinary life has been forming all along. Still, there's one final lesson hidden inside these daily actions. Consistency is powerful, but only when it survives interruptions. Because every meaningful journey eventually encounters setbacks, mistakes, unexpected delays, moments when everything appears to be falling apart. The question is no longer whether you will stumble. The question is, what will you do the day after you stumble? That answer determines far more than the stumble itself. And that is where our journey continues. Failure has convinced many people to stop, not because failure was final, but because they believed it was a verdict. One missed day became, "I lack discipline." One rejection became, "I'm not good enough." One setback became, "Perhaps this isn't meant for me." Life rarely speaks so absolutely. Our interpretation usually does. The story you tell yourself after a setback often matters more than the setback itself. There's an old potter who has spent decades shaping clay. Visitors are always surprised by how many broken pots lie behind his workshop. One day, a child asked, "Why do you keep the broken ones?" The potter picked up a cracked bowl and smiled. "This bowl reminds me where my hands were still learning." He placed it back on the shelf. "If I had stopped after this one," he continued, "none of the beautiful ones would exist." The child looked at the finished pieces displayed inside the workshop. For the first time, she realized something. The masterpieces have been built on top of countless imperfections, not in spite of them. Many people expect growth to follow a straight line. Work hard, improve steadily, reach success. Real life rarely follows such neat patterns. There are seasons when progress feels rapid, then weeks when nothing seems to change. Sometimes you even feel as though you are moving backward. Do not confuse temporary stillness with permanent defeat. Winter does not mean the tree has stopped living. Much of its most important work is happening where no one can see it. Think about learning a new language. At first, every sentence requires effort. You search for words. You make mistakes. You hesitate. Months later, you suddenly realize you are thinking in that language without trying. No single lesson created that transformation. It emerged from hundreds of ordinary moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Character grows exactly the same way. You do not notice every small improvement. Others often see it before you do. There is another quiet danger that appears after early success. Comfort. The habits that created progress begin to feel optional. The morning routine slowly disappears. Preparation becomes less important. Attention to detail weakens. Success has an unusual way of convincing people they no longer need the behaviors that created it. Yet a musician continues practicing after the concert. A gardener continues watering after the flowers bloom. A lighthouse continues shining after one ship reaches safety. What creates excellence must also protect it. One candle can light another without losing any of its own flame. Character works in much the same way. Your daily actions quietly influence people around you. A calm response during conflict gives others permission to remain calm. An honest decision encourages honesty. A patient conversation softens another person's anxiety. Many people underestimate how deeply ordinary behavior affects extraordinary numbers of lives. Leadership often begins before you realize anyone is watching. There's a mountain path that thousands of hikers use every year. The trail did not appear overnight. One traveler walked it, then another, then hundreds. Eventually, what was once wild ground became a trusted path. Your habits create similar pathways within your own life. Every repetition makes the next repetition easier. Every act of patience strengthens patience. Every act of generosity strengthens generosity. Every excuse strengthens excuses. The path you walk most often becomes the easiest path to follow. Choose it carefully. Some days will feel effortless. Others will test every promise you have made to yourself. There will be mornings when getting out of bed feels heavier than usual. Conversations that challenge your patience. Unexpected disappointments. Plans that fall apart. Those are not interruptions to your journey. They are part of the journey. Anyone can remain disciplined when life is convenient. Character quietly reveals itself when convenience disappears. One of the most powerful questions you can ask at the end of each day is remarkably simple. Did today's actions move me closer to the person I want to become? Notice what the question does not ask. It does not ask whether you were perfect, whether everyone approved of you, whether everything went according to plan. It asks only whether your direction remained true. Progress is measured by direction far more often than by speed. A traveler taking slow, steady steps toward the destination will always arrive before someone running enthusiastically in circles. There's wisdom in ending each day with gratitude, not because every day is easy, but because gratitude protects perspective. You begin noticing the lesson hidden inside difficulty, the strength quietly growing beneath disappointment, the opportunities disguised as inconvenience. Gratitude does not erase hardship. It simply prevents hardship from becoming the entire story. A grateful heart continues finding reasons to move forward when a discouraged heart sees only reasons to stop. Years from now, people may admire what you have accomplished, the work you created, the lives you influenced, the peace you carry, the wisdom you speak with. Very few will understand how those qualities were built. They will not see the quiet mornings, the repeated choices, the unseen acts of integrity, the countless moments when no audience existed. Yet those invisible moments are where every extraordinary life is truly written, not on stages, not in celebrations, but in ordinary days that were lived with extraordinary intention. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Life is rarely changed by one magnificent decision. It is shaped by thousands of ordinary decisions made faithfully over time. Each day offers another opportunity to cast a vote for the person you are becoming. Some votes feel insignificant. None of them are wasted, because every sunrise places another blank page into your hands. And every choice becomes another sentence in the story of your life. Write enough good sentences, and one day, without realizing exactly when it happened, you will have written an extraordinary story. But before this journey comes to its conclusion, there's one final truth that gathers every lesson into a single guiding principle. It is the quiet force behind self-mastery, behind courage, behind discipline, behind every meaningful life. Because long after achievements fade and recognition disappears, one thing remains, the person you have become. And that is where our final chapters begins. Chapter 8. Become the person your future self will thank you for. Every decision creates two versions of your future. One version is built for today's comfort. The other is built by today's courage. The difference between them is rarely obvious at the moment. Choosing to sleep a little longer feels harmless. Postponing an important conversation seems insignificant. Delaying one healthy habit appears unimportant. Life rarely changes dramatically because of a single decision. It changes because small decisions quietly become the direction of an entire lifetime. There's an old saying among tree growers. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time, it is today. Those words carry a deeper meaning than they first appear. Many people spend years regretting the opportunities they missed, the years they wasted, the habits they abandoned, the chances they never took. Regret keeps looking backward. Growth quietly begins looking forward. No amount of guilt can rewrite yesterday, but one courageous decision can begin rewriting tomorrow. There was once a stone cutter working beside a busy road. Travelers passed him every day. Some laughed, others ignored him. To them, he appeared to be doing the same simple task over and over again. Strike the stone, brush away the dust, strike it again. One traveler finally stopped and asked, "Don't you become tired of doing the same thing every day?" The old craftsman rested his hammer and smiled. "They think I'm cutting stones." He gently touched the smooth surface before him. "I'm building the entrance to a cathedral my grandchildren will one day walk through." Suddenly, the work no longer seemed ordinary. His daily actions had always been connected to a future larger than himself. Purpose transforms repetition into meaning. Most people make decisions based on how they feel right now. A smaller number make decisions based on who they wish to become years from now. The first group asks, "What do I want today?" The second quietly asks, "What will my future self thank me for?" Those two questions often produce completely different answers. Your future self will rarely thank you for unnecessary excuses, for avoiding difficult conversations, for choosing comfort over growth. But they will almost always thank you for the moments when you protected your health, strengthened your character, honored your word, and continued moving forward when quitting seemed easier. Think about an architect designing a home. Months before the first brick is laid, the blueprint already exists. Every wall, every doorway, every window has been carefully considered. Construction simply follows the vision. Many people try to build their future without first deciding who they want to become. Without a blueprint, life becomes reactive. Circumstances decide. Other people decide. Temporary emotions decide. Character begins changing the moment you create a clear picture of the person you are committed to becoming. There's a traveler preparing for a long journey across unfamiliar mountains. He carefully packs only what will help him reach the destination: food, water, warm clothing, a map, a compass. Then he notices several heavy stones lying nearby. He could carry them. But why would he? Many of us travel through life carrying unnecessary weight, old resentment, past embarrassment, mistakes that have already taught their lesson, the opinions of people who no longer walk beside us. Every unnecessary burden slows the journey. Sometimes becoming your future self requires releasing your former self. One of the most powerful questions you can ask before making any decision is surprisingly simple. Will this choice make tomorrow easier or harder? That extra hour of study. Tomorrow becomes easier. That unnecessary argument. Tomorrow becomes heavier. The healthy meal. Tomorrow becomes stronger. That broken promise. Tomorrow becomes more difficult. Life quietly compounds every choice. Whether those choices build freedom or regret depends on what you repeatedly choose today. There's an elderly clockmaker whose workshop has remained open for over 50 years. Every clock leaving his hands keeps remarkably accurate time. A young apprentice once asked, "How do you create something that lasts so long?" The old craftsman replied, "I don't rush the invisible parts." He explained that the gears hidden inside the clock deserve more attention than the polish which everyone admired. People judge the outside. Time depends on the inside. Human beings often reverse those priorities. They spend enormous effort polishing appearances, while neglecting patience, integrity, humility, self-control. The qualities no one immediately sees are usually the ones determining the quality of your life. Many people dream about changing their circumstances, a better career, better relationships, better finances, a healthier body. Those dreams are worthwhile, but circumstances often change after identity changes. The disciplined person naturally creates different opportunities. The honest person naturally builds deeper trust. The patient person creates stronger relationships. The courageous person discovers opportunities invisible to the fearful. Your future is rarely transformed by wishing for different conditions. It is transformed by becoming a different person within those conditions. There is something beautiful about sunrise. It arrives every morning without asking whether yesterday was successful. It does not refuse to appear because someone wasted the previous day. It simply offers another beginning. Life is remarkably generous in the same way. As long as you are breathing, there remains another opportunity to choose differently, to speak differently, to think differently, to live differently. The past explains you. It does not have to imprison you. One day, without noticing exactly when it happened, people will begin responding to you differently. Not because your face changed, not because your clothes became more expensive, but because something quieter changed. You carry yourself with greater peace. Your words become more thoughtful. Your reactions become calmer. Your promises become dependable. Confidence begins flowing naturally because it is supported by evidence instead of hope. Character always introduces itself before your accomplishments ever do. There is no greater investment than becoming someone your future self can admire. Money can be lost. Recognition fades. Positions change. Circumstances shift. But character travels with you everywhere. It influences every relationship, every opportunity, every conversation, every challenge, every victory. It is the one possession that quietly shapes every other possession. Still, there is one final truth that every person must eventually understand. No matter how carefully you prepare, no matter how disciplined you become, life will still bring uncertainty, unexpected loss, unexpected change, unexpected endings. The question is no longer whether life will test you. It certainly will. The deeper question is this: who will you be when those moments arrive? Because the answer to that question ultimately defines the entire journey. Life has a quiet way of asking the same question again and again, not with words, but with moments. Will you choose patience or anger, discipline or comfort, truth or convenience, growth or familiarity? These moments rarely announce themselves as life-changing decisions. They appear disguised as ordinary Tuesdays, a difficult conversation, an unexpected delay, a temptation no one else sees, a promise only you remember making. Yet these ordinary moments quietly determine the extraordinary person you eventually become. There was once an elderly lighthouse keeper who had served the same coastline for more than 40 years. Every evening, just before sunset, he climbed the long spiral staircase carrying a small lantern. He cleaned the great lens, trimmed the wick, filled the lamp with fresh oil. Then he waited as darkness slowly settled over the sea. One young visitor asked him, "Has anyone ever thanked you for lighting the lighthouse?" The old keeper smiled. "Very few." "Then why continue?" He looked toward the distant ocean, where ships were becoming small shadows against the horizon. "Because somewhere tonight," he said quietly, "someone I will never meet is depending on a light they may never know I kept burning." There was wisdom hidden inside those words. Character is much like that lighthouse. Many of your greatest acts will never receive applause. Many sacrifices will remain unnoticed. Many disciplined choices will never become headlines, yet they will quietly protect lives, including your own. Not everything valuable is visible. One of the greatest gifts you can offer your future self is trust. Trust that when challenges arrive, you will respond instead of react. Trust that when fear appears, you will still move forward. Trust that when temptation whispers, you will remember your values. This kind of trust cannot be purchased. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be inherited. It is earned, one kept promise at a time. Every promise you keep strengthens the relationship you have with yourself. Every promise you break quietly weakens it. People often ask how to become more confident. Confidence grows naturally when your actions consistently prove that your words can be believed. There is another lesson that many people discover too late. You do not become your future self someday. You become your future self today, not through one dramatic breakthrough, but through today's decisions. Tomorrow never arrives wearing a label that says, "This is the day your new life begins." When tomorrow finally comes, it is simply called today. Waiting for the perfect time often becomes another way of postponing the life you already know you should begin. The perfect moment has an unusual habit of never arriving. The present moment, imperfect as it may be, is the only place where transformation is ever possible. Think about a river flowing toward the sea. It does not rush. It does not compare itself with other rivers. It does not become discouraged because mountains stand in its way. It simply continues flowing. When rocks appear, it flows around them. When valleys deepen, it continues forward. Over time, its quiet persistence shapes entire landscapes. Human character works in remarkably similar ways. Gentle consistency often accomplishes what force never could. Persistence quietly defeats resistance, not because it is louder, but because it refuses to stop. Many people spend years trying to become impressive. Far fewer dedicate themselves to becoming dependable. An impressive person attracts attention. A dependable person earns trust. Attention may open a door. Trust keeps it open. People remember those who consistently showed up, those who remained honest when dishonesty was easier, those who stayed calm when everyone else panicked, those who continued serving when recognition disappeared. Dependability is one of the quietest forms of greatness. It rarely demands admiration, yet it quietly deserves it. There comes a moment in every meaningful life when success begins to change its definition. Early in life, success often means achieving more recognition, more money, more influence, more accomplishments. Later, many discover a deeper definition. Success becomes living with peace, sleeping without regret, looking into the mirror without pretending, knowing your values remain intact, realizing your family trusts your character more than your achievements, leaving people better than you found them. Perhaps true success has never been about collecting more. Perhaps it has always been about becoming more. There's an old sculptor whose final masterpiece stood in the center of a quiet village. Visitors travel from distant places to admire its beauty. One afternoon, a young artist asked, "How did you create something so magnificent?" The old sculptor looked at the towering figure and replied, "I didn't build it." The young artist looked confused. "I simply removed everything that did not belong." Those words describe personal growth perfectly. You do not have to become someone completely different. You remove what has been hiding your best self. Fear, excuses, bitterness, laziness, pride, resentment, comparison. The person you are capable of becoming has often been waiting patiently beneath those unnecessary layers. Growth is sometimes less about adding and more about uncovering. As the years pass, your possessions will change. Your address may change. Your career may change. Your friendships may change. Even your dreams may evolve. But one companion remains beside you through every season. Your character. It follows you into every opportunity, every celebration, every disappointment, every relationship, every difficult decision. No investment offers greater returns than becoming someone of wisdom, integrity, humility, and courage. Everything else eventually fades. Character quietly remains. One day, perhaps many years from now, you may find yourself sitting quietly as the evening sun disappears beyond the horizon. The noise of ambition has softened. The race has slowed. Life has given you victories. It has also given you losses. You may not remember every achievement. You may not remember every possession you owned, but you will remember the person you chose to become. You will remember whether you lived according to your values, whether you loved generously, whether you forgave quickly, whether you remained curious, whether you acted with courage when fear invited you to retreat, whether your life reflected the principles you once promised yourself you would never abandon. Those memories will bring either peace or regret. The beautiful truth is that today still allows you to choose which one awaits you. Perhaps that is the greatest freedom any human being possesses. You cannot rewrite yesterday. You cannot predict tomorrow. But you can shape the person who walks into tomorrow. That power belongs to no government, no employer, no circumstance, no critic. It belongs to you. Every sunrise places it back into your hands. Every decision either strengthens it or surrenders it. Every ordinary day quietly becomes another opportunity to build an extraordinary life. As our journey together comes to an end, pause for just a moment. Think about the person you hope to become 5 years from now. Not the salary they earn, not the title beside their name, not the applause they receive. Think about their character, how they treat people, how they respond to disappointment, how they lead, how they love, how they remain calm in uncertainty, how they continue learning long after others stop. Now ask yourself one simple question. What can I do today that would make that future version of me smile with gratitude? Do that, then do it again tomorrow, and the day after that, because extraordinary lives are never created in extraordinary moments alone. They are built through ordinary days. Live with extraordinary intention. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If these lessons have challenged you, encouraged you, or helped you see yourself differently, don't let them remain words on a page. Carry them into your conversations, your habits, your relationships, your work, your quiet moments when no one else is watching. Because knowledge changes very little, applied wisdom changes everything. Your future self is already waiting. Give them someone worth thanking. Chapter 9. The Legacy of a Well-Lived Life. Every life tells a story, not only through the words we speak, but through the choices we make when no one is watching. One day, your possessions will belong to someone else. Your position will be filled by another person. Your house will have new owners. Your name may slowly disappear from conversations. Yet something far more important has the potential to remain. The way you made people feel, the values you lived by, the courage you inspired, the kindness you offered, the example you quietly became. That is the beginning of a legacy. Many people believe a legacy is something reserved for extraordinary individuals, famous leaders, inventors, presidents, great artists. History certainly remembers them, but history is only one kind of memory. There is another kind, the memory carried in human hearts. The mother who taught her children compassion, the father who always kept his word, the teacher who encouraged one struggling student, the friend who remained loyal during difficult seasons. These lives may never appear in history books, yet they change generations. Sometimes the most powerful legacy is invisible to the world, but unforgettable to the people who experienced it. There was once an old carpenter who spent his life building simple wooden homes in a quiet village. He was not the fastest builder, nor the richest, but everyone wanted him to build their homes. A young apprentice finally asked him, "What makes your houses so special?" The carpenter smiled and ran his hand gently across a wooden beam. "I never built a house that I wouldn't gladly let my own family live in." The apprentice looked around. The beams hidden inside the walls were just as carefully crafted as the beautiful front door everyone admired. "You even polished the parts no one will ever see," the apprentice said. The old carpenter nodded, because character is revealed by what you do where applause cannot reach. Years later, the apprentice became a master builder himself. He eventually forgot many of the techniques he had been taught, but he never forgot that lesson. His greatest inheritance had not been woodworking. It had been integrity. Every person leaves fingerprints on the lives they touch. A child carries the words spoken by a parent. A student remembers the encouragement of a teacher. A colleague adopts the habits of a respected leader. A friend learns courage from another friend's example. Influence spreads quietly, often without permission, often without awareness. Whether we intend it or not, someone is learning from the way we live. That realization should not create pressure. It should create purpose. Think about a mountain echo. A single voice calls across the valley. Moments later, the sound returns. Life works in much the same way. The patience you show often returns to you through others. The generosity you extend has a way of continuing long after you have forgotten it. The bitterness you spread echoes too. So does kindness. Every action sends something into the world. Eventually, much of it finds its way back. One of the greatest misunderstandings about legacy is believing it begins at the end of life. It does not. Legacy begins today. It begins in this conversation, in the next decision, in how you respond to frustration, in how you treat someone who cannot repay you, in whether you choose honesty when dishonesty would be easier. Legacy is not a chapter written after your life. It is a sentence written every single day. There is an elderly woman who tends a small public garden near a busy train station. Every morning before sunrise, she quietly waters the flowers, pulls weeds, plants new seeds, prunes dying branches. Thousands of commuters walk past the garden every week. Most never stop. Many never notice her. Yet they notice the beauty. One morning, a little boy asked, "Why do you work so hard if nobody thanks you?" She smiled without looking up. "I'm not growing flowers for compliments." She gently brushed the soil from her hands. "I'm growing beauty because everyone deserves to walk past something that reminds them life is still beautiful." The little boy stood silently. Years later, he would remember that lesson far more clearly than the flowers themselves. There comes a season when success begins asking different questions. Not, "How much have you earned?" but, "How much have you given?" Not, "How many people know your name?" but, "How many people are grateful they knew you?" Not, "What did you accomplish?" but, "Who became stronger because you were present in their life?" Those questions have no simple numerical answers, yet they often determine whether a life feels deeply meaningful. There is wisdom in planting trees whose shade you may never sit beneath. Parents understand this. Teachers understand this. Mentors understand this. Every act of guidance carries hope into a future you may never personally witness. That is one of the most generous forms of faith, believing that your efforts today can improve someone else's tomorrow, without demanding recognition, without expecting repayment, without keeping score. Many people worry about being remembered. Perhaps a better goal is to become unforgettable for the right reasons, not because you demanded attention, but because you consistently gave encouragement, not because you collected admiration, but because you offered dignity, not because you sought importance, but because you quietly served wherever you stood. People rarely remember the loudest person in every room. They remember the person who made everyone else feel seen. There is a remarkable difference between success and significance. Success often asks, "How high can I climb?" Significance quietly asks, "How many people can I help climb with me?" The latter success becomes much more meaningful when it is used to lift others instead of separating yourself from them. That is why the greatest leaders are remembered less for their authority and more for the opportunities they created for others. As life moves forward, you will continue building something every day, perhaps a career, perhaps a family, perhaps a business, perhaps a friendship, perhaps simply a better version of yourself. Whatever you build it with the awareness that someone else may one day stand upon its foundation. Give them something solid, something honest, something worthy of trust. Because the strongest foundations are not made of concrete. They are built from character. Still, there is another truth about legacy that many people overlook. It is not only about what you leave behind. It is also about what you awaken within others. One kind word can inspire confidence. One act of courage can inspire another. One life lived with integrity can quietly change hundreds more, and that is where our journey continues. Chapter 10: The Quiet Mastery of a Meaningful Life. Life rarely changes all at once. It changes one decision at a time. One thought, one habit, one conversation, one act of courage. When people look back on extraordinary lives, they often search for dramatic turning points, the great opportunity, the lucky break, the perfect moment. But those who have lived wisely know something different. The defining moments were usually quiet. They happened when no one was watching. There's an old path winding through a dense forest. For centuries, travelers have walked along it. Some hurried toward their destination. Others walked slowly, noticing the towering trees, the birdsong, and the streams flowing beside them. Years later, few remembered exactly how quickly they reached the end, but many remembered how the journey changed them. Life resembles that forest path. The destination matters, but the person you become while walking matters even more. There once lived an elderly sailor who spent most of his life crossing unpredictable seas. His face carried the marks of countless storms. His hands were rough from years of pulling heavy ropes. Young sailors often gathered around him, eager to hear stories of dangerous voyages. One evening, a young man asked, "What was the biggest storm you ever survived?" The old sailor remained silent for a moment. Then he smiled. "It wasn't the biggest storm that taught me the most." The young man looked surprised. "It was the small storms." He pointed toward the calm sea before them. "They taught me how to prepare." The great storms only revealed what the small storms had already built inside me. Those listening became unusually quiet. The old sailor continued, "You don't prepare for difficult days when difficult days arrive. You prepare long before they appear." That lesson stayed with every young sailor who heard it. Character is built in peaceful seasons, so it can carry us through difficult ones. Many people wait for life to become easier before they decide to become stronger. But strength rarely grows in comfort alone. It grows every time you choose patience instead of frustration. Every time you remain honest when dishonesty seems profitable. Every time you forgive instead of holding resentment. Every time you continue after disappointment whispers, "Stop." The muscles of character develop exactly like the muscles of the body. They grow through resistance. Without resistance, there is little growth. Think about an eagle learning to fly. The mother does something that appears almost cruel. She removes the soft feathers from a nest. Suddenly, the place that once felt comfortable becomes uncomfortable. The young eagle begins moving toward the edge. Eventually, it spreads its wings. For the first time, it discovers it was capable of flying all along. Comfort had delayed the discovery. Sometimes life removes the softness beneath us, not to punish us, but to reveal strengths we never knew we possessed. Looking back, many of the moments you once wished had never happened may have quietly shaped your greatest qualities. The challenge that taught resilience, the rejection that redirected your purpose, the failure that deepened your wisdom, the heartbreak that expanded your compassion. Pain is not always an enemy. Handled wisely, it becomes one of life's greatest teachers. There is another lesson that quietly transforms the way we live. Everything meaningful requires maintenance. A beautiful garden grows weeds if neglected. A healthy body weakens without movement. Friendships fade without attention. Trust disappears without honesty. Peace slowly slips away without reflection. Nothing valuable remains strong simply because it once was. Every worthwhile part of life asks for continual care, not because it is fragile, but because it is alive. The happiest relationships are rarely effortless. The strongest character is never accidental. The wisest minds never stop learning. Growth is not an event. It is a lifelong practice. One of the greatest illusions is believing that mastery is a destination. It is not. There is always another lesson, another perspective, another opportunity to become kinder, calmer, wiser. Humble people understand this naturally. The more they learn, the more curious they become. Arrogance believes it has arrived. Wisdom quietly knows there is always another mountain beyond the one already climbed. That awareness keeps the heart open. It keeps the mind teachable, and it keeps the spirit growing. There was once a clockmaker whose workshop contained hundreds of clocks. Some were large, some small, some simple, others incredibly intricate. Every morning before opening his shop, he walked slowly through the room. He adjusted each clock by only a few seconds. A visitor watched this routine for several days before finally asking, "Why spend so much time correcting something so small?" The old craftsman smiled. Because small errors become large ones if ignored long enough. Life follows the same principle. A little dishonesty becomes a habit. A little resentment becomes bitterness. A little neglect becomes distance. Likewise, a little gratitude becomes joy. A little discipline becomes excellence. A little kindness becomes trust. Never underestimate the direction created by small corrections. Tiny adjustments, repeated faithfully, can completely change where your life arrives years from now. As the years pass, you may discover that peace is not found by controlling everything around you. It is found by mastering what lies within you, your reactions, your priorities, your values, your perspective. The world will continue changing. Unexpected challenges will still arrive. People will still disappoint you. Plans will still change. But a steady heart can remain calm even when circumstances refuse to cooperate. That kind of peace cannot be purchased. It is earned through years of choosing wisdom over impulse, purpose over distraction, character over convenience. Perhaps that has been the quiet invitation hidden within every chapter of this journey, not merely to improve your life, but to transform the person living it. Because when the person changes, the life naturally begins changing too. Yet there is one final truth that gathers every lesson into a single principle. One truth capable of guiding every season, every relationship, every success, and every setback. It is the simplest lesson in the entire journey. And perhaps the most important of all, that is where we will finish our story. There is a quiet truth that many people discover only after years of searching. The life you've been trying to build has been trying to build you. Every challenge, every disappointment, every unexpected detour, every joyful victory has been shaping something far greater than your circumstances. It has been shaping your character. And when character is transformed, everything else begins to find its proper place. There was once an elderly gardener whose orchard stretched farther than the eye could see. Travelers often stopped to admire the rows of healthy trees, heavy with fruit. One young visitor asked, "How did you grow such a beautiful orchard?" The old man smiled and pointed toward a single sapling planted beside the road. "I treated that little tree with the same care I gave the oldest one." The visitor looked puzzled, "But it has produced nothing." "Not yet," the gardener replied. "Care should never depend on immediate results." He gently pressed the soil around the young tree. "If you only care for what rewards you today, you will never enjoy what could bless you tomorrow." Those words stayed with the traveler long after he continued his journey. Because life asks us to care for today's unseen beginnings, even when tomorrow's harvest is still invisible. Perhaps that has been the greatest lesson hidden throughout this journey. Do not become discouraged by slow growth. Mountains are not formed overnight. Ancient forests do not appear in a single season. Great cathedrals were built stone by stone. The strongest friendships deepen conversation by conversation. Trust grows promise by promise. Wisdom grows lesson by lesson. Character grows choice by choice. Everything lasting grows quietly. There is another misunderstanding that quietly steals peace from many lives. People believe happiness lives somewhere ahead, after the promotion, after the graduation, after the perfect relationship, after the larger house, after retirement. Life keeps whispering, just one more achievement. But fulfillment has always lived somewhere much closer. It lives inside presence, inside gratitude, inside meaningful work, inside relationships built on love, inside becoming fully awake to the ordinary blessings that surround us every day. The extraordinary often hides inside what we have learned to overlook. Think about an old violin. It's what carries tiny marks from decades of being played. The finish is no longer flawless. Small scratches tell stories of concerts, celebrations, and quiet evenings. To someone who values appearances, the violin seems worn. To a master musician, it has become priceless. Human beings are much the same. Your scars do not always diminish your beauty. Sometimes they deepen it. The lessons learned through difficulty often produce a gentleness that comfort alone could never create. There is wisdom that cannot be taught in classrooms. It must be lived. There comes a season when comparison finally begins losing its grip. You stop asking, "Am I ahead of everyone else?" and begin asking, "Am I becoming the person I was created to become?" That question brings remarkable freedom. Flowers do not compete with mountains. Rivers do not compare themselves with forests. Each fulfills its own purpose. Perhaps peace begins the moment we stop measuring our journey against someone else's path. Your calling was never meant to be a copy. It was always meant to be uniquely yours. There was an elderly woman known throughout her village for her remarkable calmness. People often visited her whenever life became overwhelming. One afternoon, a young man asked, "How do you remain so peaceful when life has given you so many hardships?" She poured 2 cups of tea before answering. "When I was young," she said softly, "I tried to control everything." She smiled gently. The weather, other people, the future, my mistakes. She looked out the window as the wind moved quietly through the trees. Then I discovered something. I cannot control the wind, but I can learn how to adjust the sails. The young man sat silently. Years later, whenever difficulties appeared, those simple words returned to him. Life becomes lighter when we stop fighting what cannot be controlled and begin strengthening what can. As the years pass, you may forget many of the books you have read, many conversations, many places you have visited, even many achievements. But you will never completely lose the person those experiences shaped you into. That is why personal growth is one of life's safest investments. No lesson honestly learned is ever wasted. No act of kindness disappears. No moment of courage is forgotten by the heart. Everything worthwhile quietly becomes part of who you are, and who you are eventually becomes the greatest gift you offer the world. One day, you may find yourself walking slowly beneath an evening sky. The urgency that once filled your younger years has softened. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth. You no longer chase every opportunity simply because it appears. You choose more carefully. You speak more thoughtfully. You listen more deeply. You forgive more quickly. Not because life became easier, but because wisdom quietly replaced urgency. There is a beautiful simplicity that often arrives with maturity. The things that once seemed desperately important begin losing their power. The things that truly matter become wonderfully clear. Love, integrity, faithfulness, presence, kindness, peace. Everything else becomes secondary. If there is one truth worth carrying beyond these pages, perhaps it is this. Your greatest masterpiece will never be the business you build, the wealth you accumulate, the recognition you receive, or even the goals you accomplish. Your greatest masterpiece will always be the person you become while pursuing them, because achievements belong to moments. Character belongs to a lifetime, and a lifetime of good character continues influencing others long after achievements have been forgotten. So, as this journey comes to its final destination, pause, take one slow breath, and ask yourself a single question. When my story is finished, what kind of person do I want people to remember? Not for my possessions, not for my popularity, not for my titles, but for my heart, for my honesty, for my courage, for my compassion, for my willingness to grow, for my quiet strength when life became difficult. If you can answer that question, then you already know how tomorrow should be lived. One decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one act of courage at a time, one habit at a time, one ordinary day at a time. Because extraordinary lives are never built in a single moment. They are built through thousands of quiet choices that almost no one notices until one day, everyone notices the person those choices created. Thank you for sharing this journey. If these words have encouraged you, let them become more than inspiration. Let them become action. Begin today. Speak with kindness. Choose integrity. Protect your peace. Keep your promises. Remain curious. Forgive quickly. Learn constantly. Lead yourself before trying to lead others. And never underestimate the quiet power of becoming just 1% wiser, 1% kinder, and 1% more courageous each day. Years from now, your future self will look back on these ordinary moments and realize they were never ordinary at all. They were the moments that quietly built an extraordinary life. And perhaps that has been the lesson all along. The journey begins now. If you've listened this far, you've already done something that most people never do. You've paused. You've reflected. You've chosen growth over distraction. That alone says something important about you. Throughout this journey, we didn't search for shortcuts. We didn't chase quick success. We didn't pretend that life suddenly becomes easy. Instead, we explored something much more valuable, the quiet art of becoming. We discovered that every great life begins with mastering the invisible leader within. That discipline is stronger than motivation. That courage is choosing your values even when fear is present. That extraordinary lives are built from ordinary actions repeated with consistency. That your future is shaped not by one defining moment, but by thousands of seemingly insignificant choices. And finally, that the greatest legacy you will ever leave behind is not what you own, but who you become. Perhaps the most important lesson is also the simplest. Life is not asking you to become perfect. It is asking you to become intentional. Every morning gives you another opportunity to begin again. Every mistake offers another lesson. Every setback carries the possibility of hidden wisdom. Every conversation is another chance to practice kindness. Every decision is another vote for the person you are becoming. You don't have to change your entire life today. You only need to choose the next right step. Then, tomorrow, choose it again. That is how remarkable lives are quietly built. One day, years from now, you may not remember every sentence from this audiobook. You may forget the stories, the metaphors, even the chapter titles. But my hope is that something much deeper remains. That before reacting, you'll pause. Before giving up, you'll take one more step. Before choosing comfort, you'll remember your purpose. Before judging yourself, you'll choose growth. Before following fear, you'll follow your values. If that happens, then these words have already done their work. Never underestimate what a single year of intentional living can accomplish. 1 year of reading instead of scrolling. 1 year of keeping your promises. 1 year of protecting your peace. 1 year of learning. 1 year of forgiving. 1 year of showing kindness. 1 year of choosing discipline over excuses. You may look in the mirror 12 months from now and barely recognize the person looking back. Not because your appearance changed, but because your character did. And character changes everything. The world doesn't need more people pretending to have all the answers. It needs more people who are willing to grow. More people who choose honesty over image. More people who choose wisdom over impulse. More people who remain kind in a world that often rewards cruelty. More people who quietly lead by example. Be one of those people. Someone somewhere will become stronger simply because you chose to become stronger first. That is how real change spreads. One life inspiring another. Before we part, I'd like to leave you with one final question. A question only you can answer. When you wake up tomorrow morning, what is one small decision your future self will thank you for? Not 10 decisions. Not a perfect plan. Just one. Make that choice. Protect it. Repeat it. Allow it to become a habit. Allow that habit to become your character. And allow your character to become the story your life tells. If this audiobook has encouraged you, if it has challenged the way you think, if it has helped you see yourself differently, then don't let this be the end of the journey. There are many more ideas to explore, more timeless principles to uncover, and more conversations waiting to help you become the strongest, wisest, and most authentic version of yourself. So if you haven't already, subscribe to Mindflow Studio and join a growing community of people who believe that true success begins within. If this audiobook spoke to you, share it with someone who needs these words today. Sometimes a single conversation, a single book, or a single idea arrives at exactly the right moment to change the direction of a life. Perhaps this can be that moment for someone you care about. Thank you, not simply for listening, but for choosing to invest in yourself. Wherever you are in the world, whatever challenges lie ahead, remember this. Your circumstances do not write your story. Your choices do. And every sunrise places another blank page into your hands. Write wisely, live courageously, lead yourself faithfully, and never stop becoming the person your future self will be proud to remember. Until next time, take care of your mind, protect your peace, and keep moving forward, one quiet step at a time.